In the scorching summer of 1873, a young woman knelt in the dirt of Red Hollow while an entire town laughed at her desperation. What they didn't know was that this humiliated farmer would soon bring down the most feared land baron in Kansas territory and rewrite the rules of survival on the American frontier. This is the story of Savannah Hale, the woman who turned mockery into revolution. Stay with me until the end of this story, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The heat hit like a fist that afternoon. Savannah Hale felt the sun burning through her faded calico dress as she gripped the wagon seat, knuckles white against splintered wood. 27 years old and already carved lean by frontier life, she'd learned to ignore discomfort the way other women ignored gossip. But the wagon lurching beneath her wasn't something she could push aside. The wheel groaned, a sound like bones breaking. No, not now, please not now. Her mule, Jasper, stopped in the middle of Main Street without being told. The animal knew trouble before it arrived, same as Savannah did. She climbed down slow, her boots hitting packed earth that hadn't seen rain in 6 weeks. Red Hollow sprawled around her in shades of brown and gray. False front buildings that looked sturdy until wind tested them. Boardwalks warped from sun, and people who measured worth in acres owned. The wagon wheel cracked apart like a gunshot. 50-pound sacks of flour hit the street and burst open, white powder exploding across dirt that swallowed it immediately. Savannah lunged forward, dropping to her knees without thinking. Her hands plunged into the ruined flour, scooping it back toward the torn sacks, even though she absolutely knew, it was already gone. Look at that. The voice came from her left, male, amused. Poor thing's trying to save dirt. Laughter rippled down the street. Not cruel exactly, but not kind either. The laughter of people watching someone else's disaster and feeling grateful it wasn't theirs. Savannah's jaw tightened. She kept scooping. Savannah. That was Mrs. Chen from the boarding house, voice dropping to something meant to sound sympathetic. Honey, that flour's ruined. You can't. I paid for it. Savannah didn't look up. I'm taking it home. More laughter. Sharper this time. She'd bought the flour on credit from Dobson's Mercantile, 4 sacks at 8 cents a pound, because her last crop had failed and she needed something to get through winter. The wheat she'd planted this spring was finally coming in, golden and heavy in fields her father had cleared before cholera took him. Her mother had died 2 years before that, back in Missouri, under circumstances Savannah didn't discuss. The 80 acres outside Red Hollow was all she had left of either of them. And now half her flour budget was mixing with Kansas dirt, while townspeople watched like it was a Saturday show. Need some help there, Miss Hale? The new voice cut through the murmuring crowd, deeper, carrying authority without shouting. Savannah glanced up, squinting against sun that turned the speaker into a dark silhouette. Tall, broad-shouldered, hat brim shading his face. Ethan Mercer. She recognized him even backlit. Everyone in the territory knew Mercer. He ran the largest cattle operation within 50 miles, employed 24 hands, and had the kind of quiet reputation that made men step aside when he entered a room. I'm fine. Savannah went back to scooping flour that was 90% dirt now. You're not fine. Your wagon's broken and I said I'm fine. Ethan crouched down beside her anyway. This close she could see his face, weathered, maybe 35, with eyes that didn't match the hardness of everything else about him. He reached for one of the flour sacks. Savannah slapped his hand away. Don't! I'm trying to help. I don't want your help. Savannah, Miss Hale. Her voice went flat. You don't know me well enough for first names, Mr. Mercer. He pulled his hand back, studied her for a long moment, then nodded once and stood up, dusting off his knees. Jenkins! He turned toward 3 cowboys leaning against the saloon wall. Get some tools and fix this lady's wagon wheel. The cowboys didn't move, just looked at each other with expressions Savannah had seen 1,000 times, men deciding whether orders applied to them when the work seemed beneath their dignity. Now, Ethan added, still not shouting. Didn't have to. They moved. But Savannah was already standing, flour dust coating her dress and arms like she'd been rolled in it. I don't need your men, I don't need your tools, and I especially don't need you deciding what I need. Ethan opened his mouth, closed it. Behind him, the cowboys had stopped again, watching this play out with expressions caught between amusement and confusion. "Your choice," Ethan said finally. "But that wheel's not fixing itself. And you're 5 miles from home in heat that'll kill a horse. Then I'll walk." "With 4 sacks of flour?" "With whatever I can carry." She meant it. Ethan could see that. So could everyone else gathering along the boardwalk. Shopkeepers, ranch wives, drifters, all drawn by the spectacle of Savannah Hale's latest disaster. In a town of 300 people, entertainment was scarce. "Savannah," the new voice froze her. Victor Crowley stepped out of Dobson's Mercantile like he owned it, which, technically, he did. Victor owned the Mercantile, half the saloon, the land office, and enough mortgage papers to control most of the farming families within 20 miles. 52 years old and built like a bull, he wore expensive clothes that looked wrong out here. St. Louis tailoring in a town where most men wore whatever didn't have holes. He smiled. Savannah hated that smile. "Having some trouble?" Victor's voice carried false concern. "That's a shame. Really is." Savannah said nothing. "You know," Victor continued, moving closer, boots clicking on the boardwalk, "I was just inside settling accounts with Dobson. Saw you bought that flour on credit. 4 sacks at 40 pounds each. That's what, $12.80 total?" He made a show of calculating. "Added to what you already owe for seed and tools, you're up to $47 now. $47 due after harvest." Everyone was listening. Victor knew it. Savannah knew it. "I'll pay after harvest," she said. "Same as always." Of course, assuming you have a harvest." Victor glanced at her broken wagon, the ruined flour. "But things happen, don't they? Wheels break, crops fail. And then good people end up losing land their families worked for generations." He sighed. "Tragedy, really." The threat wasn't even disguised. Savannah felt something cold settle in her chest. The same feeling she'd gotten the night her mother died, when she realized nobody was coming to help. That she was alone. That survival meant getting harder instead of softer. "I'll have your money after harvest," she repeated. "I certainly hope so." Victor's smile widened. "Because if you can't pay, well, that 80 acres would make a fine addition to my holdings. Good water access, flat ground. Your father knew how to pick land. I'll give him that." Someone in the crowd made a noise, disgust, maybe sympathy. Victor ignored it, but "I'm sure it won't come to that." He tipped his hat. "Good day, Miss Hale. Do try to get home before dark. Dangerous for a woman alone on these roads." He walked away. The crowd started dispersing, the show over now that the main act had finished. Savannah stood in the middle of Main Street, surrounded by ruined flour and splintered wood, feeling the weight of $47 like a stone in her gut. Ethan was still there. Hadn't moved. "Don't," Savannah said before he could speak. "I wasn't going to say anything." "Yes, you were. You were going to offer help again. Money, maybe, or charity disguised as something else." She looked at him directly. "I've been taking care of myself for 6 years, Mr. Mercer. I'll manage." "I believe you will." He said it simply. "But the offer stands. If you change your mind." Then he left too. Savannah waited until the street was mostly empty before she started gathering what she could salvage. 2 sacks were complete losses, the flour mixed so thoroughly with dirt it was basically mud. The third was half ruined. Only the fourth had survived intact, and even that had torn seams she'd need to repair. Jasper watched her with liquid eyes that seemed to hold judgment. "Don't start," she told the mule. It took her an hour to rig a carrying system using rope and canvas. She left the broken wagon where it was, would need tools she didn't have to fix it properly, and loaded Jasper with the salvageable flour, plus what supplies she couldn't afford to lose. The mule staggered under the weight, but held steady. The walk home was 5 miles of exposure to sun that seemed actively hostile. Savannah's dress was soaked with sweat before she'd gone half a mile. Her boots, worn thin at the soles, raised blisters that broke and bled. Jasper plodded beside her with the resignation of an animal that had learned not to expect mercy from the world. By the time her cabin appeared in the distance, small, weathered, defiant against empty prairie, the sun was dropping toward the horizon and Savannah was moving on pure stubbornness. She unloaded Jasper at the barn, gave him water and the last of her good grain, then carried the salvaged flour inside. Her cabin was 2 rooms, one for living, one for sleeping. Furniture her father had built, a stove that barely worked, windows that didn't close all the way, which meant winter was going to be miserable. Savannah dropped the flour sacks on the floor and sat down hard on the only chair that didn't wobble. $47. She had maybe 10 saved. The wheat coming in would cover the rest if she got a decent price, if the weather held, if nothing else went wrong. Too many ifs. And Victor knew it. Victor always knew exactly how much pressure someone could take before breaking. Her stomach was empty, had been since breakfast, but she was too tired to cook, too tired to do anything except sit there staring at flour-covered hands and thinking about her mother. Margaret Hale had died in the rain. That was what Savannah remembered most. Not the sickness or the pain, but the rain hammering down on frozen Missouri ground while her mother walked because they didn't have money for a doctor and the nearest town was 8 miles away. Savannah had been 11. She'd walked beside her mother, holding her up when she stumbled, until Margaret couldn't walk anymore and collapsed in mud that soaked through her dress. They'd never made it to town. Victor Crowley had owned their Missouri farm then too, through a web of debt and forged documents Savannah hadn't understood until years later. After her mother died, he'd taken the land, forced Savannah and her father west with nothing but a wagon and tools, and the kind of anger that burned slow and permanent. Her father had rebuilt in Kansas, found this land, worked it until his heart gave out 3 years back. And now Victor was here again, circling like he'd circled before, waiting for Savannah to fail so he could take what was left. Except she wasn't 11 anymore. She wasn't scared. She was just so damn tired. Savannah woke to pounding on her door. The cabin was dark, full night, no moon. She'd fallen asleep in the chair still wearing her flower-covered dress. The knock came again, hard enough to rattle the hinges. "Miss Hale," male voice. Urgent. Savannah grabbed the shotgun she kept loaded beside the door. "Who is it?" "Ethan Mercer. Please, I need your help." She opened the door with the gun still raised. Ethan stood on her porch looking worse than she'd ever seen him. Hat gone, shirt torn, blood on his hands that didn't seem to be his. "What happened?" "My horse, my mare, she's dying, and I don't—" He stopped, seemed to realize he wasn't making sense, started over. "Something's wrong with the creek water. 3 of my horses drank from it today, and they're all sick. 2 are stable, but Dancer, she's the best horse I've ever owned, and she's—" "Poisoned water?" Savannah's mind clicked through possibilities. "Show me." She grabbed a canvas bag her father had used for veterinary work. Hadn't opened it in years, but muscle memory took over. Herbs, tools, clean cloth. Ethan had a horse waiting. She climbed up behind him without asking permission and held on while he rode hard back toward his ranch. The mare was in a stall, lying on her side with flanks heaving and foam around her mouth. Beautiful animal, chestnut coat slick with sweat, eyes rolling white with pain. 2 ranch hands stood nearby looking helpless. They stepped back when Savannah entered. She knelt beside the horse, put her hands on the mare's neck, felt the rapid pulse and overheated skin. "How long since she drank?" 4 hours, Ethan said. "Maybe 5. And the others?" "Stable. Not good, but stable." Savannah opened her bag, pulled out dried herbs her father had taught her to recognize before she could read. Activated charcoal. Slippery elm. Things that sounded like nonsense but worked when nothing else did. "I need hot water, clean as you can get it." One of the ranch hands ran. Savannah mixed the charcoal into a paste, forced it down the mare's throat while Ethan held her head steady. The horse fought, but weakly. Then the slippery elm tea, cooled enough not to burn but warm enough to work. The mare's breathing was rapid, shallow. "Talk to her," Savannah said. "What?" "Talk to her. She knows your voice. She needs to hear it." Ethan moved to the mare's head, stroking her neck, murmuring words Savannah couldn't hear. She worked methodically, checking temperature, pulse, the color of gums and eyes, looking for signs she knew how to read because her father had made her learn, had told her that animals were honest in ways people never were. 2 hours passed. The mare's breathing steadied, pulse slowed, the whites of her eyes receded. At 3 a.m., Dancer lifted her head. By dawn, she was standing. Ethan sagged against the stall wall like someone had cut his strings. The ranch hands were staring at Savannah like she'd performed magic. One of them, young kid, maybe 19, had his mouth literally hanging open. "How did you—" Ethan started. "My father was a veterinarian before he was a farmer. Taught me everything he knew." Savannah packed her bag, suddenly exhausted again. "Your water source is contaminated. Could be natural runoff carrying something toxic, could be deliberate. Either way, you need to find a new creek or dig a well." "Deliberate?" Ethan's voice sharpened. "You think someone poisoned my water? I think you should test it before you let anything else drink from it." She headed for the door. Ethan followed. "Wait, I need to pay you." "No, you don't." "You saved Dancer. That mare's worth more than—" "I don't want your money, Mr. Mercer." Savannah turned to face him. The sun was coming up behind his ranch house, painting everything gold. "I want you to remember this the next time some man in town acts like I'm an idiot for trying to farm alone. I want you to remember that I know things, that I'm capable, that I don't need rescuing." She walked past him toward where Jasper was tied. "I could offer you a job," Ethan said. Savannah stopped. "I'm taking a herd north in 2 weeks, following the western trail because the usual route's too crowded, and I'm hearing reports of poisoned water holes. Need someone who knows animals and land." He paused. "Pays $40 for 6 weeks' work." $40. Almost enough to clear her debt. "Your men won't like taking orders from a woman," Savannah said without turning around. "Then they'll learn to like it. Or they'll find other work." She looked back at him. Ethan met her eyes steadily. "I'll think about it," Savannah said. She rode home as the sun climbed and heat built again. Past her wheat fields where grain was ripening but still weeks from harvest. Past the creek that bordered her property. Water that looked clear but might not be. Past fences her father had built that needed repair she couldn't afford. $40 would change everything. But working for Ethan Mercer meant depending on him, and dependence was the first step toward control. She'd learned that watching her mother, learned it again when Victor had taken their Missouri farm. Every time someone offered help, there was a price attached. Still, $40. Savannah spent the day checking her own water, testing it the way her father had taught her. Taste, smell, watching how animals reacted. Everything seemed fine, but she started carrying water from farther upstream just in case, and she watched the creek more carefully. That night she heard something. Movement outside. Not wind, too deliberate. Savannah grabbed her shotgun and eased the door open, staying in shadow. Someone was in her paddock. She could see a figure moving near the gate, doing something she couldn't make out from this distance. Then the figure mounted a horse and rode off fast, heading east toward Victor Crowley's land. Savannah ran to the paddock. The gate was open, completely open, when she'd latched it herself before sunset, and Jasper was gone. No. No, no, no. She followed Jasper's tracks in moonlight. The mule had wandered straight into her sorghum field, the one she'd planted as a backup crop, the one that was almost ready to harvest. And something had spooked him into running, because the tracks showed a panicked gallop that had torn through row after row of grain, 20% of her sorghum, maybe more, destroyed. Savannah stood in the ruined field and felt something crack open in her chest. Not sadness, not even anger yet. Just a cold, clear understanding that this wasn't an accident. Someone had opened her gate. Someone had driven Jasper into the field deliberately. Victor. It had to be Victor. She found Jasper in the far end of her property, tangled in fence wire and bleeding from a dozen cuts. Got him free, led him back to the barn, treated his wounds with shaking hands. The mule kept making soft, confused sounds like he couldn't understand why this had happened. Savannah couldn't either. No, that was a lie. She understood perfectly. This was how Victor worked, not with direct violence, but with small disasters that added up. A broken wagon here, poisoned water there, a spooked animal destroying crops. Things that could be explained as bad luck, but happened too often to be coincidence. He was making sure she couldn't pay her debt, making sure he could take her land legally, with papers and court orders, so nobody could say he'd stolen it, just like he'd done to her family in Missouri, just like he'd done to how many others. Savannah sat in the barn with Jasper until dawn, stroking his neck, thinking about her mother walking through rain, thinking about her father working himself to death on land that might be taken anyway, thinking about $40 in cattle drives and whether accepting Ethan's offer meant giving up or fighting smarter. The sun came up. Savannah made her decision. She found Ethan at his ranch 3 hours later, talking with his foreman about the upcoming drive. He looked surprised to see her. "I'll take the job," Savannah said. $40 for 6 weeks, but I have conditions. All right. First, I'm not cooking, cleaning, or doing anything your men wouldn't do themselves. I'm there for the animals and the land, nothing else. Agreed. Second, if any of your men speak to me the way men in town speak to me, I leave. No matter where we are or what's happening, and you still pay me for the time I worked. Ethan considered this, nodded. Agreed. Third, when we get back, you tell everyone in Red Hollow exactly what I did on that drive. You don't let them assume I was camp help or that I got special treatment. You tell them the truth. I can do that. Savannah held out her hand. Ethan shook it, his grip firm but not crushing, like he understood this was an agreement between equals. We leave in 5 days, he said. Be here at dawn. Bring whatever you need for 6 weeks on the trail. Savannah nodded and turned to go. Savannah. She looked back. What happened last night? You look... He stopped. You look angry. Someone cut my paddock gate and drove my mule through my sorghum field, destroyed about a quarter of the crop. Ethan's expression went hard. Victor. Can't prove it. You know it was him. Knowing isn't proof. Savannah's jaw tightened. But I'm done letting him take things from me. That's why I'm taking your job. I need the money, yes. But I also need people to see that I'm not some helpless woman who can be pushed around until she breaks. Nobody who's met you thinks you're helpless. Then they're not paying attention. She rode home before he could respond. The next 5 days were brutal. Savannah worked her own land from before dawn until after dark, securing fences, checking water sources, harvesting what sorghum could be saved. Her hands developed new blisters over old scars. Her back ached from hours bent over crops. At night, she packed supplies for the cattle drive, trying to anticipate everything she might need. On the 4th day, she rode into town to buy trail supplies. The same people who'd watched her humiliation with the flour now watched her load a pack horse with rope, canvas, and tools. Whispers followed her down Main Street. Heard she's working Mercer's cattle drive. Crazy. Woman's got no business. Someone should tell Ethan before he makes a mistake. Savannah ignored them. Paid for her supplies with money she didn't have, adding it to her debt at Dobson's Mercantile. The clerk looked uncomfortable taking her credit, but did it anyway. Victor was waiting outside. Miss Hale. He tipped his hat like they were friends. Heard you're joining a cattle drive. That's ambitious. Savannah didn't stop walking. Of course, that means your land will be unattended for 6 weeks. Victor fell into step beside her. Lot can happen to an empty farm. Fences break. Wells get contaminated. Squatters move in. Touch my property and I'll shoot you myself. Such hostility. I'm simply expressing concern. He smiled. But I suppose you've made your choice. Chasing cowboys north instead of tending your own land. We'll see how that works out. He walked away, leaving Savannah standing in the street with her hands clenched so tight her nails drew blood. That night she barely slept. Kept thinking about her cabin empty, her fields unwatched, 6 weeks of vulnerability. But she'd hired the Bennett boy to check her property twice a week. 17-year-old Sam who needed money and seemed trustworthy. It was the best she could do. Dawn came cold and clear. Savannah loaded Jasper with her gear and rode to Ethan's ranch. 24 cowboys were already there, checking horses and equipment. They stopped talking when she arrived. One of them, Cole Turner, a ranch hand with a face like weathered leather and a reputation for being difficult, laughed out loud. You're joking, Cole said to Ethan. Joss, tell me you're joking. She's here to work, Ethan replied. Same as you. Work? She's going to break a nail and cry before we're 10 miles out. Several men laughed. Not all of them, but enough. Savannah climbed off Jasper and faced Cole directly. You want to test that theory? We can settle it right now. Otherwise, get out of my way. Cole's smile faltered. Something in Savannah's eyes must have warned him she wasn't bluffing. This is going to be a disaster, he muttered, but stepped aside. Ethan raised his voice. Listen up. This is Savannah Hale. She saved my best horse last week when she was dying. She knows more about animals and water than most of you combined. You'll treat her with the same respect you treat each other. Anyone got a problem with that can collect their pay and leave now. Silence. Nobody moved. All right then. Ethan mounted his horse. Let's move out. The drive began. 300 cattle headed north under a sky that stretched forever. Savannah rode near the back, watching the herd, watching the men, learning the rhythm of this kind of work. It was different from farming, more movement, more chaos, more things that could go wrong in an instant. But she understood animals, and she understood land. And by the end of the first day, when she identified a water source the regular scout had missed, several cowboys were looking at her differently. Cole Turner wasn't one of them. "Lucky guess," he said when she led them to the creek. Savannah ignored him. By the third day, she'd prevented 2 cattle from drinking water that smelled wrong. Same poison scent she'd noticed at Ethan's ranch. By the 5th day, she'd treated a horse with colic and probably saved its life. By the end of the first week, half the crew was asking her opinion on things they'd normally figure out themselves. Cole still sneered, but his sneers were getting quieter. Then, on the 8th night, everything changed. They were camped near a narrow valley when Savannah noticed Ethan's foreman looking sick, sweating, pale, hands shaking. She approached quietly. "How long have you felt like this?" "Couple hours." The foreman, Frank, a solid man in his 50s, tried to wave her off. "It'll pass. You drink from that creek this afternoon?" "Yeah, why?" "Because 3 other men did too, and they're all showing the same symptoms." Savannah's mind raced. It's not poison. It's contamination. Probably animal carcass upstream. She spent the next 4 hours treating 6 sick cowboys with remedies her father had taught her. By midnight, they were stable. By morning, they were thanking her. Even Cole Turner looked grudgingly impressed. "Where'd you learn that?" he asked. "My father." Savannah didn't elaborate. They pushed north. The landscape changed from prairie to rougher country, hills, dried creek beds, places where water was scarce, and every decision mattered. Savannah earned her pay 10 times over, finding water, reading weather, keeping the herd healthy when disease started spreading through the cattle. And slowly, impossibly, the cowboys started to respect her. Not all of them, not Cole, but enough that when she spoke, people listened. Ethan watched it happen with something like wonder. "You're better at this than you let on," he said one evening. "I'm exactly as good as I said I was." Savannah was treating a cow's infected hoof. "You just didn't believe me." "Fair point." They rode in silence for a while. Then Ethan said, "Can I ask you something?" "Depends on the question." "Why do you push everyone away? Even people trying to help?" Savannah didn't answer immediately. The cow shifted under her hands, trusting her touch even though it must have hurt. "Because help always comes with strings," she said finally. "And I've seen what happens when women start depending on men who claim to care. They end up with nothing that's truly theirs. Not all men are like that. Enough are." Ethan seemed to accept this, didn't push further. That night, camped under stars so thick they looked like spilled salt, Savannah lay awake thinking about her mother, about her father, about 80 acres back in Red Hollow that might not be hers by the time she returned, and about whether fighting alone was bravery or just stubbornness wearing a different name. She didn't have an answer. But tomorrow they'd push north again, and there was work to do, and for now that was enough. The answer came 3 weeks into the drive, though not in any way Savannah expected. They'd crossed into territory where water holes appeared on maps but didn't exist in reality, dried up or poisoned or simply wrong. Savannah had led them to 5 good sources in as many days, earning grudging nods from men who'd stopped questioning her judgment. Even Cole Turner had gone quiet, though his silence felt more like resentment than respect. The herd was restless that morning, cattle shifting and lowing in ways that made Savannah's skin prickle. She rode up to where Ethan was consulting with Frank about the day's route. "Something's wrong," she said. Ethan looked at her. "Wrong how?" "I don't know yet. But the cattle know. Look at them." The herd was bunching together, heads up, nostrils flaring, testing the air for something humans couldn't smell. Frank squinted at the horizon. "Sky's clear, no storm coming. Doesn't have to be weather." Savannah turned her horse in a slow circle, scanning the landscape. Hills to the west, open prairie to the east, a dry creek bed cutting north. Everything looked normal, except it didn't feel normal. Then she smelled it. Smoke. Faint, but unmistakable. "Fire," she said. "Upwind." Ethan stood in his stirrups, shading his eyes. I don't see anything. You will. 10 minutes later, the smoke appeared, a dark smudge on the western horizon spreading south like spilled ink. The wind was pushing it directly toward them. How far? Ethan's voice stayed calm, but his hands tightened on the reins. Savannah judged the distance, the wind speed, the dry grass surrounding them. 2 miles, maybe less. And it's moving fast. Frank, get everyone mounted. We need to move the herd east, away from the fire line. East puts us in that broken country we've been avoiding, Frank said. Lots of gullies and rocks. We could lose cattle. We'll definitely lose them if they stampede into fire. The crew mobilized fast, credit to Ethan's training. Within 5 minutes, every man was positioned around the herd, ready to move. But the cattle were panicking now, smelling smoke, bunching tighter instead of moving. They won't go, Cole shouted from the south flank. They're too spooked. He was right. The cattle were frozen with fear, packed so tight they couldn't move even if they wanted to. 300 animals creating their own gridlock. Savannah rode directly into the herd. What are you doing? Ethan yelled. She ignored him, pushed Jasper through the cattle until she reached the center of the mass, where the pressure was worst. Then she pulled out her pistol and fired 3 shots straight up. The crack of gunfire broke the paralysis. Cattle scattered in every direction, exactly what you weren't supposed to do in a crisis. But sometimes chaos was better than stillness. The herd split apart, and in that split second of movement, the cowboys drove them east. Savannah stayed in the middle, firing periodic shots to keep the cattle moving, preventing them from bunching again. Her ears rang from the gunfire. Jasper was sweating beneath her, terrified but trusting her enough to stay steady. The smoke thickened. Behind them, flames appeared on the western hills like something hungry. Faster! Ethan rode alongside the herd, pushing stragglers. We need to make the creek bed before... His horse stumbled, stepped in a gopher hole hidden by grass and went down hard, throwing Ethan forward. He hit the ground and rolled, and for a terrible moment Savannah thought he might get up. Then the cattle were on him. Not a full stampede, not yet, but 300 panicked animals running from fire don't care what's in their path. Savannah saw Ethan try to stand, saw him fall again, saw hooves coming down around him like hammers. She didn't think, just spurred Jasper forward into the charging cattle, leaning low over the mule's neck, trusting the animal's sure feet. Fired her pistol left and right, splitting the herd around Ethan's fallen body. The cattle parted like water around a stone, close enough that she felt their heat and heard their terrified bellowing. Jasper reached Ethan. Savannah jumped down, grabbed Ethan under the arms, and dragged him sideways as a massive bull thundered past, close enough to graze her shoulder. She hauled Ethan toward a shallow depression in the ground, barely deep enough to call a ditch, but better than nothing. They dropped into it together. Cattle poured overhead, hooves kicking dirt onto them, the sound deafening. Savannah covered Ethan's body with her own, making herself as flat as possible, while the herd stampeded over and around them. It lasted maybe 30 seconds, felt like 30 minutes. When the last cow passed, Savannah rolled off Ethan and sat up, coughing dust. Her hands were shaking. Ethan wasn't moving. Don't be dead, she said. Don't you dare be dead. He groaned. Not dead. Just wish I was. Relief hit her so hard she almost laughed. Can you stand? Don't know. Give me a minute. They didn't have a minute. The fire was visible now, racing across the prairie with the wind behind it. Savannah got to her feet, every muscle screaming, and looked for Jasper. The mule was 20 yards away, wild-eyed but uninjured. She whistled, and he came. Between the two of them, they got Ethan onto Jasper's back. He'd broken something, ribs, maybe his collarbone, and his face was gray with pain, but he was conscious. The herd, he said through gritted teeth. Frank's got them. We need to move. They rode east, following the path the cattle had taken. Behind them, the fire consumed everything they'd left behind. Savannah didn't look back, just focused on keeping Ethan upright and Jasper moving. They found the crew 2 miles east in the creek bed Frank had mentioned. The cattle were scattered, but mostly intact. A few injuries, 1 dead calf, but nothing like the disaster it could have been. Frank took 1 look at Ethan and started giving orders. Get him down. Careful with his shoulder. Someone find the medical kit. They laid Ethan on a blanket. Savannah knelt beside him, checking his pupils, his pulse, the way his chest moved when he breathed. Broken collarbone, she said. Maybe 2 ribs on the left side, lots of bruising. He'll live, but he needs to stay still. How do you know it's his collarbone? Cole asked. Because I can see the bone pushing against the skin. Savannah didn't look at him. Someone get me straight branches and clean cloth. We need to immobilize his shoulder. They did what she said. For the next hour, Savannah set Ethan's shoulder using techniques her father had shown her on injured animals, adapting them for human anatomy. Ethan passed out twice from pain. She kept working. When she finished, his shoulder was bound tight against his chest and his breathing had steadied. He'll need to rest for a week, she told Frank. Minimum. We can't stop for a week. We've got deadlines. Then he rides in the supply wagon and doesn't do anything strenuous. Otherwise, that bone won't set right and he'll have problems the rest of his life. Frank looked at Ethan, unconscious now, face slack. Made a decision. You're in charge of his recovery. Whatever you say goes. Cole made a disgusted noise. We're taking orders from her now? You got a better idea? Frank's voice went hard. She just saved his life, rode into a stampede and pulled him out. You want to question her judgment, do it after we get these cattle to market. Cole shut up. That night, while Ethan slept in the wagon, Savannah sat by the fire cleaning her pistol. Her hands had stopped shaking, but her mind kept replaying those 30 seconds under the stampede, the sound of hooves, the certainty of death, the strange calm that had come over her in the middle of it. You should have left me. Ethan's voice came from the wagon. Savannah looked up. He was awake, watching her. You're delirious, she said. I'm serious. You risked your life for mine. You would have done the same. Maybe, but I pay you to handle cattle in water, not throw yourself in front of stampedes. He tried to sit up, winced, stayed down. That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen. Can it be both? He almost smiled. Why'd you do it? Savannah considered the question, considered lying, decided against it. Because I'm tired of watching people get hurt by things they can't control. My mother died because we couldn't afford help when she needed it. My father worked himself to death trying to keep land that might get taken anyway. And I thought... She stopped. I thought if I could save one person, just one, maybe it would balance something. Does it? No, but it doesn't make it less worth doing. Ethan was quiet for a long time, then, thank you. Savannah nodded and went back to cleaning her gun. The fire had changed things, not just the immediate crisis, but what it meant. Because prairie fires didn't start themselves in late summer when the grass was dry but not naturally combustible. Someone had set it. The question was who. They found the answer 2 days later when they crossed paths with another cattle crew heading south. The other foreman, a grizzled man named Patterson, pulled up alongside Frank. You boys are lucky to be alive, Patterson said. That fire burned straight through to the river. Heard it started near Victor Crowley's northern property. Savannah's blood went cold. Crowley's land? Frank frowned. What's he doing this far north? Expanding. Bought up 3 ranches last month. Heard he's trying to control the whole northern route. Patterson spat tobacco juice. Also heard he's been causing problems for anyone who competes with his operations. Problems like prairie fires? Can't prove it, but funny how fires keep starting near land he wants to buy. Patterson tipped his hat. Watch yourselves. That man's got a reach. After he rode off, Frank came to find Savannah. You think Victor started that fire? I think Victor does whatever benefits Victor. If burning prairie helps him control the cattle routes, then yes, I think he did it. Why would he care about our drive? Savannah looked at him. Because I'm on it, and he wants me to fail. Frank absorbed this. That's a lot of trouble to go through for 80 acres. It's not about the land. It's about making sure nobody stands up to him. If I succeed out here, other people might start thinking they can succeed too. You really think it's that calculated? I know it is. That night, Cole Turner approached her for the first time since the stampede. He looked uncomfortable, like speaking to her physically hurt. You saved Ethan, he said without preamble. I did. Why? Because it needed doing. Cole stared at the fire. I had a sister, younger than me. She wanted to run a business in Denver, kept talking about opening a dress shop. Everyone laughed at her, said women couldn't handle business, couldn't handle money, couldn't handle being alone in a city. His jaw tightened. She tried anyway, failed within a year. Came home broke and ashamed. Married a man she didn't love because she thought that's what she deserved. Savannah waited. She killed herself last spring, Cole continued. Left a note saying she was tired of being told what she couldn't do. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, just... He looked at her directly. I treated you like trash because you reminded me of her. Because if you could do this, could succeed out here, then maybe she could have succeeded too. And I didn't want to believe that. Easier to think women just can't handle certain things. But we can. Yeah. Cole's voice was rough. You can, and I was wrong. He walked away before Savannah could respond. The next morning, she noticed subtle changes. Men who'd ignored her now nodded when she passed. Cowboys who'd questioned her judgment now asked her advice. Cole still wasn't friendly, but he stopped sneering. Progress. Small, but real. They pushed north for another week. Ethan recovered slowly, still riding in the wagon, but sitting up now, giving orders that Frank carried out. His shoulder was healing crooked. Savannah could see it, but straight enough to be functional. He'd have a permanent reminder of the day he almost died. The herd stayed healthy. Water sources appeared where Savannah predicted. The weather held. Everything was going better than anyone had expected. Then, 12 days from their destination, the rider appeared. He came at dusk, approaching camp alone on a horse too expensive for a regular cowboy. Young, maybe 25, wearing a vest that marked him as someone's assistant. He asked for Ethan. I'm Ethan Mercer, Ethan called from the wagon, still not supposed to be moving around much. The rider dismounted. Message from Red Hollow, from a Victor Crowley. Savannah's stomach dropped. The rider handed over a sealed envelope. Ethan broke it open, read silently. His face went hard. What is it? Frank asked. Ethan looked at Savannah. It's for you. She took the letter. Read words written in Victor's careful script. Miss Hale, I hope this message finds you well on your ambitious cattle drive. I write with unfortunate news regarding your property. It seems your fence lines have developed significant damage during your absence, likely from weather or perhaps vagrant activity. Additionally, your wheat crop has been affected by what appears to be early blight. As your primary creditor, I felt obligated to inspect the property personally. I'm afraid the damage is extensive. Your debt now stands at $63, accounting for diminished crop value. I've taken the liberty of filing preliminary foreclosure paperwork, to be finalized upon your return should payment not be rendered in full. I remain, as always, your humble servant, Victor Crowley. Savannah read it twice, then once more. What does it say? Ethan asked quietly. He's taking my land. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, distant. He damaged my property while I was gone and increased my debt. Now he's foreclosing. He can't do that. He just did. We'll fight it. Get a lawyer. Prove he sabotaged. With what evidence? The word of a woman against Red Hollow's most powerful man? Savannah crumpled the letter. He's already won. She walked away from camp, kept walking until the firelight was a distant glow and the prairie stretched empty in every direction. Then she stood there in darkness and felt everything she'd been holding together start to crack. 27 years of fighting. 27 years of surviving. And for what? Victor was going to take the land anyway. Take it the same way he'd taken her family's Missouri farm. Take it the same way he'd taken everything from everyone too weak to stop him. She heard footsteps behind her, Ethan walking carefully, one hand pressed to his ribs. You shouldn't be out here, Savannah said without turning. Neither should you. I need to be alone. No, you don't. He stopped beside her. You need to be angry, and you need someone to be angry with you. Savannah looked at him. Being angry won't save my land. Maybe not, but giving up definitely won't. I'm not giving up. I'm being realistic. Victor has money, power, legal authority. I have 80 acres and $40 I haven't even earned yet. You have more than that, Ethan's voice was firm. You have every person on this drive who's seen what you can do. You have Frank, who trusts your judgment more than his own now. You have Cole, who apologized for the first time in his life. You have me. Having people isn't the same as having power. Sometimes it is. They stood in silence. Above them, stars wheeled in patterns Savannah's father had taught her to read. Off to the east, a coyote called. What if I lose anyway? She asked quietly. Then you lose fighting, not running. My mother fought. She died in the mud. Your mother died fighting alone. Ethan turned to face her. You're not alone anymore. Not if you don't want to be. Savannah felt something in her chest. Not quite hope, but close enough to hurt. I don't know how to not be alone. Neither did I. Then you rode into my stable at 3 a.m. and saved my horse. He smiled slightly. You're not as solitary as you think. The messenger was gone by morning, heading back to Red Hollow with confirmation that his message had been delivered. Savannah watched him ride south and felt the distance between her and her land like a physical ache. But Ethan was right. Giving up wasn't an option. They reached the cattle market 8 days later, a sprawling complex of pens and auction houses where ranchers from 6 territories converged. The herd sold for more than Ethan had projected, healthy animals bringing premium prices. He paid Savannah her $40 in gold coin, counted out carefully. You earned more than this, he said. We agreed on 40. That was before you saved my life and half the herd. He added another $10. Non-negotiable, $50. Still not enough to clear $63 of debt, and that was assuming Victor hadn't increased it again while she was counting. The crew celebrated that night, whiskey and gambling and loud stories about the drive. Savannah sat slightly apart, running calculations in her head that never came out right. Cole dropped down beside her. You look miserable for someone who just earned $50. I need 63. So earn more. Doing what? He gestured at the cattle pens. Half these ranchers have sick animals. You fix 6 horses on our drive alone. Set up shop, charge for your services. It wasn't a bad idea. Savannah spent the next day walking through the pens, looking for animals in distress. Found a dozen problems other people had missed: early colic, infected hooves, contaminated feed. Started treating them. Word spread fast. By the second day, ranchers were seeking her out. By the third, she had a line of people waiting. She charged $2 per animal, fixed 38 animals in 5 days, walked away with $76 total, more than enough to clear her debt. But when they rode back toward Red Hollow, triumph felt hollow. Because clearing the debt didn't stop Victor. It just delayed him. The town appeared on the horizon at sunset, small, dusty, unchanged. Savannah felt her throat tighten as they rode down Main Street. Same buildings, same people, same boardwalks where she'd knelt in flour dirt 8 weeks ago. Except this time, people stopped what they were doing to watch, and the watching felt different. Ethan rode beside her, still moving carefully but healing. You ready? No? Good, means you're paying attention. They went to Dobson's Mercantile first. The clerk looked surprised to see them. Miss Hale, Mr. Mercer, heard you were on a cattle drive. We were, Savannah set her coin purse on the counter. I'm here to settle my account. Oh, well, I'd need to check the ledger, but I believe Mr. Crowley said, I don't care what Victor said. I'm paying what I owe, including the increased amount he claimed. The clerk checked his books. $63, according to the latest assessment. Savannah counted out $63 in gold and silver. The clerk's eyes widened. This clears your debt. I know, but Mr. Crowley said you'd never... Mr. Crowley was wrong. Savannah picked up the receipt he'd written. I want this filed with the county recorder tomorrow, along with documentation that my property debt is cleared in full. Yes, ma'am. They left the Mercantile. Outside, a small crowd had gathered. Drawn by the spectacle of Savannah Hale actually paying off debt everyone assumed she couldn't cover. Victor was among them. Standing on the boardwalk outside his office, watching with an expression Savannah couldn't read. Miss Hale, he called. Welcome back. I trust your cattle drive was successful? Successful enough? So I see. How fortunate. He descended the steps, boots clicking. Of course, there's still the matter of property damage that occurred during your absence. Fences, crops, general deterioration, that'll need to be addressed. Send me an itemized bill. I'll review it. I'm not sure you understand the extent. I understand perfectly. Savannah met his eyes. You tried to ruin me while I was gone. You failed. Now you're looking for another angle. But I paid my debt, Victor, every cent. You've got no legal claim to my land. Legal claims can be manufactured. Then I'll fight them, every single one. They stood facing each other in the middle of Main Street while the town watched. Victor smiled, The same cold smile he'd worn when he'd humiliated her 8 weeks ago. "You've gotten bold, Miss Hale. I wonder how long that'll last." "Longer than your patience." She turned and walked away. Heard whispers follow her, but didn't care. Ethan fell into step beside her. "That went well," he said. "He's not done. You know that." "Neither are you." Savannah rode out to her property as the sun dropped toward the horizon, half expected to find it burned, destroyed, stripped bare. Instead, found something worse. Subtle damage. Fence post pulled slightly loose. Wheat showing signs of disease that might be natural or might be introduced. Water in the well tasting slightly off. Nothing dramatic enough to prove sabotage, but everything adding up to more debt, more vulnerability, more ammunition for Victor. She stood in her wheat field, golden grain mixed with brown patches of blight, and felt exhaustion settle into her bones. The cabin door was unlocked. Not broken, just unlocked, like someone had been inside. Savannah checked everything. Nothing obviously stolen, but things were wrong. Furniture moved slightly, supplies disturbed. The photograph of her parents turned face down. Someone had been here, searching for something or just sending a message. She righted the photograph, locked the door, sat in darkness, and listened to silence. Tomorrow she'd start repairs. Tomorrow she'd figure out how to fight Victor's next move. Tomorrow she'd be strong again. Tonight, she let herself feel scared. A knock came near midnight. Savannah grabbed her shotgun, checked the window. Ethan stood on her porch holding a lantern. She opened the door. "You should be resting." "Couldn't sleep. Thought you might not be sleeping either." He held up a basket. "Brought food. Frank's wife made enough to feed the whole crew." They sat on her porch, eating cold chicken and bread while night sounds drifted across the prairie. Crickets. Wind. The distant call of an owl. "How bad is it?" Ethan asked. "The property?" "Bad. Not destroyed, but damaged enough to cost money I don't have." "I could loan." "No." "Savannah, no loans, no charity. I won't owe you the way I owed Victor. It's not the same." "It's exactly the same. Money creates obligation. Obligation creates control." Ethan was quiet. "Then, what if it wasn't a loan? What if it was payment for services? You could work my ranch, handle veterinary issues, consult on water and land management. That's just a loan with extra steps. It's employment. There's a difference." Savannah considered this. "How much?" $20 a month. Plus I'd cover materials for any major projects." "That's too much." "That's what the work is worth." She studied his face in the lantern light, looking for angles, hidden intentions, the trap she'd learned to expect. Found nothing but honest regard. "1 month trial," she said finally. "If it doesn't work, we stop. No hard feelings." "Deal." They shook on it. His hand was warm, calloused from years of ranch work. Felt solid in a way that made Savannah nervous and hopeful in equal measure. After he left, she sat alone on the porch and thought about trust. About whether accepting help meant losing independence, or just meant being smart enough to recognize when fighting alone was actually losing slowly. She didn't have an answer yet, but the night was quiet, and her land was still hers, and tomorrow the real work would begin. Morning came with work that didn't care about exhaustion or fear. Savannah was in her wheat field before sunrise, examining the blight damage by lantern light. The disease had spread since she'd left, brown patches consuming what should have been golden grain ready for harvest. She touched the infected stalks, feeling them crumble under her fingers like they'd been burned from the inside. Natural blight didn't spread this evenly, didn't create patterns this deliberate. She found the proof an hour later, a cloth sack hidden under straw near the field's edge, still containing traces of copper sulfate mixed with something else she didn't recognize. Someone had poisoned her crop with chemicals designed to look like disease. Savannah sat back on her heels, holding the sack, and felt cold certainty settle over her. This wasn't just Victor being vindictive. This was Victor being methodical. He'd planned this before she'd even left for the cattle drive, probably the same night someone had cut her paddock gate. The question was what to do about it. She rode into town before the sun was fully up, the sack of poison wrapped in canvas and tied to Jasper's saddle. Red Hollow was quiet at this hour. Shops still closed, streets empty except for a few early risers heading to work. Savannah went straight to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Hayes was drinking coffee when she walked in. He looked up, surprised, then wary. Miss Hale, didn't expect to see you this early. Found something on my property. Thought you should see it. She set the sack on his desk. Hayes opened it carefully, sniffed, made a face. What is this? Poison. Someone used it to kill my wheat crop. Made it look like natural blight. You sure about that? I'm sure someone hid it in my field. I'm sure my crop started dying after I left town. And I'm sure this didn't get there by accident. Hayes studied the sack. You saying someone deliberately poisoned your wheat? I'm saying exactly that. You got proof? Witnesses? Just the poison and the timing. Hayes sighed. Set the sack down. Savannah, I can't investigate based on suspicion. Need evidence. Need to know who did it and why. Victor Crowley did it. You know he did it. What I know and what I can prove are different things. Hayes's voice gentled slightly. Look, I understand you've had troubles with Victor. Everyone knows about your debt situation, but accusing him of crop poisoning without solid evidence just makes you look crazy? Desperate? Savannah's jaw tightened. Say what you mean, Sheriff. Makes you look like you're reaching for explanations when sometimes bad things just happen. Bad things don't hide poison sacks in fields. Maybe someone else hid it. Maybe it's been there for years. Maybe it has nothing to do with your crop at all. Savannah picked up the sack. So you're not going to investigate? I didn't say that. I said I need more evidence before I can… Never mind. She walked toward the door. Savannah, wait. I'm trying to help. No, you're not. You're trying to avoid trouble with the richest man in the county. She turned back. My mother used to say that cowards always have good reasons for their cowardice. Looks like she was right. She left before he could respond. Outside, the sun was fully up now, painting Main Street gold. Savannah stood on the boardwalk holding her poisoned sack and feeling the familiar weight of being alone. Sheriff Hayes wouldn't help. The law wouldn't help. Which meant she was back to fighting with nothing but stubbornness and spite. Heard you paid off your debt. The voice came from behind her. Savannah turned to find Lydia Bennett leaning against the general store wall, a woman about Savannah's age with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. Lydia ran the boarding house her mother had left her, took no nonsense from anyone, and was one of the few people in Red Hollow who'd never treated Savannah like a charity case. I did, Savannah said. Also heard your wheat got hit by blight while you were gone. News travels fast. In a town this size, everything travels fast. Lydia pushed off the wall. You going to harvest what's left? If there's anything worth harvesting. There is. I saw your field yesterday. Eastern section's still good. Probably 60% of what you planted. Savannah looked at her. Why were you in my field? Because Sam Bennett, my cousin, the kid you hired to check your property, told me something was wrong, so I went to look. Lydia's expression was hard. Someone's been on your land, Savannah. Multiple times. Sam saw tracks, found evidence of fence tampering. He's 17 and scared, so he didn't report it. But I'm not 17 and I'm not scared. Did he see who? No, but he said the tracks led toward Crowley's property, every time. Savannah felt something click into place. You believe me? That Victor's behind this? I know he's behind it. My mother lost our farm to Victor 12 years ago. Same tactics, mysterious damage, increased debt, foreclosure papers filed before we knew what was happening. Lydia's voice went flat. We only kept the boarding house because it was in town and harder to claim, but I watched my mother spend her last years bitter and broken over losing land her father had cleared. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be smart. Lydia glanced around to make sure no one was listening. Victor's been doing this for decades. Your family in Missouri wasn't the first, and you're not the last. There are at least a dozen families in this county alone who've lost land to him through suspicious circumstances. Can any of them prove it? No, that's why he's still doing it. Lydia crossed her arms. But maybe if enough people compared stories, we'd find patterns, evidence, something that would hold up even in Sheriff Hayes's cowardly hands. Savannah considered this. You're talking about organizing, getting people together. I'm talking about stopping a predator before he destroys anyone else. That's dangerous. Victor has money, influence, probably the law in his pocket. So we get our own influence, build something he can't buy or intimidate. Lydia's eyes were fierce. My mother died thinking she was alone, that her failure was personal, but it wasn't. It was Victor being Victor. and I'm done letting him win. They stood in morning sunlight that was already getting hot, two women who'd both lost too much to the same man. Savannah felt something shift in her chest, not quite hope, but something harder, something that tasted like anger mixed with purpose. "What do you need from me?" Savannah asked. "Names. Anyone you know who's had trouble with Victor. Anyone who might talk if they knew they weren't alone. There's a widow north of town. Mrs. Chen at the boarding house mentioned her last year. Lost her husband's ranch to debt she said wasn't legitimate. And the Martinez family near the river. And I know most of them. Been collecting names for months." Lydia pulled out a small notebook. "I've got 17 families so far who've either lost land to Victor or are about to. What we need is someone willing to speak up, someone people will listen to." "That's not me. Half this town still thinks I'm a joke. The half that saw you kneel in flour dirt, yes, but the other half heard you worked a cattle drive, heard you saved Ethan Mercer's life, heard you came back with money when everyone assumed you'd fail." Lydia met Savannah's eyes. "You're not a joke anymore. You're proof that Victor doesn't always win." Before Savannah could respond, a commotion erupted down the street. Raised voices, someone shouting. They turned to see a small crowd gathering outside the bank. "What now?" Lydia muttered. They walked over. The crowd was focused on a man Savannah recognized. George Patterson owned a small ranch west of town, had 3 kids and a wife who sewed to make extra money. He was arguing with the bank manager. "I paid that note." George's face was red. "I paid it 3 months ago. According to our records, the payment was applied to interest only. The principal is still outstanding." The bank manager, a thin man named Winters who'd worked for Victor's bank for 15 years, spoke with the patience of someone repeating a script. "And since you're now 60 days late, the bank is exercising its right to foreclose." "That's not... I paid the full amount. You took my money." "We took a payment, Mr. Patterson. Whether it was the full amount is a matter of interpretation." "Interpretation? It was $300 for a $200 note, plus accumulated interest and fees, which brings the total to..." "You're stealing my ranch," the crowd murmured. Some sympathetic, some uncomfortable, most just watching like this was entertainment. Savannah pushed forward. "What's the outstanding amount?" she asked. Winters looked at her with barely concealed disdain. "This is a private matter, Miss Hale. The man shouting about it in the street doesn't sound private. Nevertheless, $470, George said, voice breaking, for a note that was 203 months ago. They're saying I owe fees and penalties I never agreed to." "Do you have the original loan documents?" "They burned. House fire last year. But I know what I signed." "And I have the bank's records," Winters said smoothly, "which clearly show..." "Who owns this bank?" Savannah interrupted. Winters' expression flickered. "That's not relevant." "Victor Crowley owns this bank, doesn't he?" The crowd went quiet. Everyone knew the answer, but nobody had said it out loud. "Mr. Crowley is a significant investor, yes," Winters admitted. "So he profits when people can't pay loans, especially when those loans mysteriously triple in size." Savannah turned to George. "You have any proof of your payment? Receipt? Witness?" "My wife was there. And the teller who took the money." "Where's that teller now?" "Quit 2 weeks ago. Nobody knows where he went." Of course. Savannah looked at the crowd, saw variations of the same expression, anger mixed with helplessness. They all knew this was wrong. None of them knew what to do about it. "Here's what you do," Savannah said to George. "You get a lawyer. You demand to see the original loan documents and payment records. And you don't leave your ranch no matter what papers they serve you." "I can't afford a lawyer." "Then find someone who can." She glanced at Lydia. "Or find enough people with the same problem that you can share the cost." "That's interfering with legal proceedings," Winters said sharply. "I could have you arrested for..." "For what? Giving advice?" Savannah stepped closer. "You want to arrest me? Get the sheriff. I'll wait right here." Winters' face flushed, but he didn't move. After a moment, he retreated into the bank, muttering about proper channels and legal consequences. The crowd dispersed slowly. George stood looking shell-shocked. "Thank you," he said to Savannah. "I don't know if it'll help, but thank you." "It'll help if you're not alone. Find other people in the same situation. Compare stories." After he left, Lydia turned to Savannah with something like admiration. "You just made an enemy of Victor's bank manager." I already had Victor as an enemy. What's one more? The difference is, now people saw you fight back. That matters. They walked back toward Savannah's wagon. The morning was fully engaged now. Heat building, people moving through their routines, Red Hollow settling into the familiar rhythms of survival. I need to harvest my wheat, Savannah said. Whatever's left, can't afford to lose more. I'll help, so will others if you ask. I'm not asking for charity. It's not charity, it's neighbors helping neighbors. Lydia smiled slightly. You're going to have to get used to that concept if we're going to take down Victor Crowley. Savannah spent the next 3 days harvesting wheat with help that appeared without her asking. Lydia came first, bringing tools and determination. Then Sam Bennett, guilty about not reporting the tampering sooner. Then Mrs. Chen from the boarding house, who was 70 but worked like she was 40. Then George Patterson, grateful and furious in equal measure. They worked from dawn until dark, cutting wheat and hauling it to Savannah's barn. The eastern section of her field was healthy, 60% like Lydia had said, maybe a little more. The western section was total loss, brown stalks that crumbled at a touch. On the third evening, Ethan rode up as they were finishing. He surveyed the workers, the harvested grain, the burned section they'd left standing as evidence. Looks like you've got help, he said. Looks like? Savannah wiped sweat from her face. Didn't ask for it, but I'm not complaining. Good, because I brought more. He gestured toward the road where a wagon was approaching. Frank sat on the driver's seat with 2 other ranch hands from the cattle drive. What are they doing here? Savannah asked. Heard you needed hands for harvest. Figured we owed you. Ethan climbed down from his horse, moving easier now, almost back to normal. Also heard Victor's been causing problems again. Victor's always causing problems. This time he might have overplayed. Frank joined them, tipping his hat to Lydia and the others. Word spreading about George Patterson, about the bank. People are starting to ask questions. Questions don't stop foreclosures, Savannah said. No, but questions make it harder for men like Victor to operate in darkness. Frank looked at the burned section of wheat. This poison? Chemical blight. Someone applied it while I was gone. You report it? Sheriff said he needed more evidence. Frank spat in the dirt. Sheriff's a coward. Everyone knows it. They worked until full dark, finishing the harvest by lantern light. When the last of the good wheat was stored in Savannah's barn, they sat around a fire someone had built, drinking coffee and eating bread Mrs. Chen had brought. How much did you lose? Lydia asked. 40% of the crop, maybe 10% more from cutting early. Savannah ran calculations in her head. I'll have enough to get through winter. Won't have extra to sell, but I'll survive. Which means Victor didn't win. Not yet. George Patterson leaned forward. Savannah, you asked me to find other people with loan problems. I found 8 families. All of them have loans through Victor's bank. All of them say the amounts increased without explanation. Any of them have proof? 2 kept copies of original documents. Another has a witness who remembers the terms. That's a start. A start toward what? Sam Bennett asked. Even with proof, who's going to challenge Victor? He owns half the county. He doesn't own people, Savannah said, not if they refuse to be owned. Easy to say when you don't have kids to feed. George's voice was bitter. I can't risk losing my ranch on principle. My family needs that land. Then we make sure you don't lose it. Savannah met his eyes. We find a lawyer who's not on Victor's payroll. We gather everyone he's cheated. We build a case so solid even Sheriff Hayes can't ignore it. That'll take time, money, resources we don't have. So we get them. How? Savannah didn't have an answer, not yet. But sitting around the fire with these people, farmers and ranchers and workers who'd all been hurt by the same man, she felt something crystallizing, an idea that was half-formed but growing stronger. What if we stopped fighting alone? She said slowly. What if instead of individual families trying to hold on to individual farms, we worked together? Shared resources, shared costs, shared risk. Like a partnership? Lydia asked. Like a cooperative. We pool water rights, grazing land, equipment. We negotiate prices together instead of separately. We protect each other's property when someone's away. Frank nodded slowly. That could work, Strength in numbers. Victor would hate it, George said. Exactly. Savannah leaned forward. His whole strategy depends on people being isolated, on families struggling alone with no support. But if we're connected, if we're organized, he can't pick us off one by one. You're talking about revolution, Mrs. Chen said quietly, in a town where Victor controls almost everything. I'm talking about survival, just organized survival instead of individual. They sat in silence, considering. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the darkness, a horse whinnied. I'm in, Lydia said finally. My boarding house doesn't have land to contribute, but I can offer meeting space, coordination, record keeping. I can contribute grazing rights, Frank said. Ethan's got more land than he needs. I'd bet he'd lease some to a cooperative for fair rates. I'll ask him, Savannah said. One by one, the others agreed. Not everyone. Some were too scared, too uncertain, but enough that by the time the fire burned down to coals, they had the skeleton of something real. A frontier cooperative, the first of its kind in Red Hollow, and Victor Crowley's worst nightmare. News spread faster than Savannah expected. Within a week, 20 families had expressed interest in joining the cooperative. Within 2 weeks, they had formal agreements drafted with help from a lawyer Lydia found in Topeka, a young man named Ellis who'd lost his own family farm to suspicious foreclosure and was willing to work for reduced rates. They met in Lydia's boarding house parlor, too many people for Savannah's cabin. The room was packed with farmers, ranchers, widows, young families struggling to make land payments. Savannah stood in front of them, feeling completely unprepared to lead anything. Most of you know why we're here, she started. Victor Crowley has spent decades taking land from people who can't fight back, using debt, fake fees, suspicious damage, legal manipulation. He does it because we're alone, because individual families don't have the resources to challenge him. Heads nodded. Everyone in this room had a story. So we stop being alone. We form a cooperative that shares resources and protects members. We pool water rights, so if one well goes dry, others can help. We share equipment, so buying a new plow doesn't bankrupt a family. We negotiate prices together, so merchants can't charge whatever they want. And if Victor comes after one of us, someone asked, he comes after all of us. We defend each other. With what? Victor has money, lawyers, the sheriff. We have numbers. And we have the truth. Savannah held up a folder Ellis had prepared. We're building documentation. Every suspicious foreclosure, every unexplained fee increase, every case of property damage that happened while someone couldn't defend themselves. We're creating a record that even corrupt officials can't ignore. That won't stop him from destroying our crops or poisoning our wells, George Patterson said. No, but it makes it harder. Because now when something happens to one of us, everyone knows. Everyone watches. Everyone testifies. Savannah looked around the room. Victor's power comes from working in darkness. We're bringing light. The vote was unanimous. 23 families joined that night. Over the next month, the number grew to 37. They organized patrols of each other's properties, shared water during a drought that hit in late August, negotiated bulk prices on supplies that saved everyone money, started documenting everything, loan terms, property conditions, suspicious incidents, and Victor noticed. Savannah was repairing fence when he rode up with 2 men she didn't recognize. She set down her hammer and waited. Miss Hale. Victor dismounted, gesturing for his companions to stay mounted. Heard you've been busy, starting some kind of collective. Cooperative. Interesting venture. Doomed, of course, but interesting. We're doing fine. For now, but cooperatives require trust, and trust is fragile. He smiled. What happens when someone's cattle graze on another member's land? When water disputes arise? When people realize sharing resources means sharing problems. We work it out, like adults. We'll see. Victor glanced at a repaired fence, the healthy wheat stubble in her field. I also hear you've been spreading stories about me, about my business practices. I've been telling the truth. If that happens to involve you, that's your problem. Slander is illegal, Miss Hale. So is poisoning crops want to compare legal problems to? Victor's smile never wavered, but his eyes went cold. You should be careful. Accidents happen to people who make powerful enemies. Is that a threat? It's a fact. The frontier is dangerous. Animals stampede. Buildings catch fire. People get hurt. He remounted his horse. Would be a shame if something happened to all your new friends, especially after they trusted you to keep them safe. He rode away before Savannah could respond. That night, she couldn't sleep. Kept hearing Victor's voice saying accidents happen, and knowing he wasn't bluffing, he'd already tried to destroy her. What would he do to 37 families? A knock came at dawn. Savannah opened the door to find Lydia standing there with a cloth bundle. "Found this on my porch this morning," Lydia said. Savannah unwrapped it. Inside was a blue shawl, faded, delicate, exactly like the one her mother had been buried in 20 years ago. Her hand started shaking. "What is it?" Lydia asked. "My mother's shawl. She was buried in it in Missouri." Savannah's voice came out rough. "How did Victor— You think Victor sent this?" "Who else would have it? Who else would know what it means?" She turned the shawl over, looking for some indication of how it had survived, where it had been. Found a note pinned to the fabric in Victor's handwriting. "Some things can't be buried deep enough." Savannah sat down hard on her porch step. Lydia sat beside her. "He dug up my mother's grave," Savannah said. "He went to Missouri and dug up her grave just to prove he could. Or he had someone else do it. Either way, he's trying to break you." "It's working." "No, it's not." Lydia took the shawl. "Because you're still here, still fighting, and now you have 37 families fighting with you. I'm putting them in danger." "They were already in danger. You just gave them a chance to fight back." Lydia folded the shawl carefully. "Victor wants you to feel alone. He wants you to think protecting your mother's memory means giving up your land. Don't let him win." Savannah looked at her. "How do you stay brave?" "I don't. I stay angry. Anger lasts longer than bravery." They sat in silence as the sun climbed. Then Savannah stood, wiped her eyes, and made a decision. "We're taking this to Ellis. We're adding grave desecration to our documentation. And we're not stopping until Victor faces consequences." That could take months, years. Then it takes years. But events moved faster than Savannah expected. 2 days later, a banker from Topeka arrived in Red Hollow asking questions about Victor's loans. Someone, Savannah suspected Ellis, had sent documentation to state regulators. By the end of the week, 3 of Victor's foreclosures were under review. Victor responded by accelerating his timeline. Suddenly, families in the cooperative started facing immediate pressure. Loans called early, property assessments that tripled tax burdens, livestock going missing. The Patterson family lost 12 head of cattle to mysterious illness. The Martinez well went dry overnight. Mrs. Chen's boarding house was cited for code violations that hadn't existed a month earlier. The cooperative held emergency meetings. Some families wanted to leave, scared of retaliation. Others wanted to fight harder. Savannah found herself mediating disputes, solving problems, holding things together through sheer force of will. Ethan helped, showed up at meetings to offer legal advice, lent equipment, provided security for properties under threat. Slowly, Savannah stopped seeing his help as obligation and started seeing it as partnership. One evening, sitting on her porch after a particularly brutal day, Ethan asked, "How are you holding up?" "I'm not sure I am." "You look like you are." "I look like I'm one disaster away from breaking." Savannah stared at the sunset. "Victor sent me my mother's shawl, the one she was buried in. He dug up her grave, Ethan." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then, "He's scared." "He doesn't seem scared." "He is. That's why he's escalating. That's why he sent the shawl. He's trying to terrify you into giving up because legal pressure is actually working." "You think?" "I know. Frank's cousin works in the Topeka land office, says Victor's under serious investigation. If we can hold out a few more weeks, he might actually face real consequences. And if we can't hold out, then we hold out anyway, because that's what you do." Savannah looked at him, this man who'd gone from stranger to employer to something she didn't have a name for yet. "Why are you doing this?" "Helping me, helping the cooperative. You've got your own ranch to run." "Because what Victor's doing is wrong, and because—" He stopped, started again. "Because I've watched you fight alone for months now, and somewhere along the way I stopped being able to imagine this valley without you in it." The words hung between them. Savannah's throat went tight. "Don't," she said. "Don't what?" "Don't make this complicated." "It's already complicated." Then don't make it more complicated. She stood up. I can't think about anything except survival right now. Can't think about... I'm not asking you to. I'm just telling you the truth. They stood in silence. Then Ethan tipped his hat and walked to his horse. I'll be at the next meeting, he said. Let me know what you need. He rode away. Savannah sat back down and held her mother's shawl and wondered when her life had gotten so tangled up with other people. The answer, she realized, was the moment she'd stopped fighting alone. And despite the terror and exhaustion and constant pressure, she wasn't sure she wanted to go back. The investigation came to Red Hollow 3 weeks later in the form of a man named Douglas Wheeler, a territorial auditor from Topeka with wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of patient thoroughness that made guilty men nervous. He arrived on a Tuesday morning and set up shop in the hotel, requesting financial records from every business Victor owned. Savannah heard about it from Lydia, who'd watched Wheeler check in with 3 heavy cases of documents. He's staying for a month, Lydia said, maybe longer, asked specifically about land transfers, loan histories, and property foreclosures going back 15 years. Victor will fight it. Victor's already fighting it. Showed up at the hotel an hour after Wheeler arrived. They talked for 20 minutes behind closed doors. What do you think happened? I think Wheeler didn't leave town, which means Victor couldn't buy him or scare him. Lydia smiled grimly. We might actually have a chance. But chance required more than one auditor. It required evidence, testimony, people willing to speak up despite consequences. Ellis had been collecting documentation for weeks, but documents meant nothing without voices behind them. Savannah spent the next 2 days visiting cooperative members, asking who would be willing to testify. The responses were mixed. Some agreed immediately. George Patterson, furious about his loan situation, wanted to tell anyone who'd listen. Mrs. Chen, who'd lost her husband's farm years earlier, said she'd been waiting for this opportunity. Others were terrified. The Martinez family had 3 young children and couldn't risk Victor's retaliation. Sam Bennett was willing, but his mother forbade it, afraid of what might happen to their boarding house. One widow Savannah visited broke down crying at the suggestion, saying she'd already lost everything once and couldn't survive it happening again. By the 3rd day, Savannah had 12 people willing to testify. Ellis said they needed at least 20 to build an overwhelming case. She was sitting in Lydia's boarding house parlor, staring at a list of names and trying to figure out who else might be convinced, when someone knocked. Lydia answered and returned with a woman Savannah had never seen before. This is Margaret Simmons, Lydia said. She has a story you need to hear. Margaret was maybe 45, thin, dressed in clothes that had seen better days. She sat down carefully, like the chair might collapse under her. I'm not from Red Hollow, Margaret started. I'm from Abilene, but I heard about what's happening here and She stopped, collecting herself. Victor Crowley destroyed my family 20 years ago. Savannah leaned forward. How? My father owned a freight business, successful, growing, making good money. Victor approached him about a partnership, said he could get better shipping contracts, access to rail lines. My father trusted him. Margaret's hands twisted in her lap. Within 2 years, Victor had manipulated the books, falsified debts, and taken complete control. My father fought back legally, cost us everything we had. Then one night, our warehouse burned down. My father was inside. The room went silent. They said it was an accident, Margaret continued. Faulty lamp, dry timber, bad luck. But my father was careful, and the fire started in 3 places simultaneously. Did anyone investigate? Savannah asked quietly. The sheriff looked into it, said there was no evidence of arson. Case closed. Margaret's voice was bitter. That sheriff worked for Victor, just like the sheriff here works for him. I'm sorry. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you because I've spent 20 years watching Victor do this to other families, moving from town to town, always one step ahead of consequences. And when I heard people were finally organizing against him, I had to come. Are you willing to testify? I'll testify to everything. The partnership fraud, the warehouse fire, the death of my father. I've kept records, letters, everything I could save. Lydia was already writing this down. Savannah felt something shift. Not hope exactly, but something harder. The sense that Victor's past was finally catching up to him. How many other families has he done this to? Savannah asked. I know of at least 6 in Kansas alone. Probably more I haven't found. Can you find them? Get them to come forward? Margaret nodded. I've been tracking his movement for years. I can reach out. Within a week, Margaret had contacted 9 families across 3 territories. 5 agreed to come to Red Hollow to meet with Wheeler. Each had a story similar to Savannah's: suspicious debt, property damage, legal manipulation, sheriffs who looked the other way. Wheeler listened to all of them, taking meticulous notes, asking detailed questions. His expression never changed, but Savannah saw him pause several times, pen hovering over paper, like he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. On the 8th day of his investigation, Wheeler requested a meeting with the cooperative. They gathered in Lydia's parlor, too many people again, standing room only. Wheeler stood at the front with his notes. "I want to thank you all for your cooperation," he started. "What I've learned over the past week is deeply troubling. Mr. Crowley's financial practices show patterns of fraud, manipulation, and what appears to be systematic exploitation of vulnerable populations." Murmurs rippled through the room. "However," Wheeler continued, "I need to be clear about what this means. I can recommend further investigation. I can forward evidence to territorial prosecutors. But I cannot guarantee legal action. Mr. Crowley has significant resources and connections. Building a case that will hold up in court requires ironclad evidence." "What we've given you isn't enough?" George Patterson asked. "It's substantial, but much of it is circumstantial. Suspicious patterns aren't the same as proof of criminal intent." "So he gets away with it," someone said bitterly. "I didn't say that. I said we need more. Specifically, we need financial records that show deliberate falsification, witnesses who can testify to direct orders to commit fraud, physical evidence of sabotage." "Victor controls all the records," Savannah said, "and anyone who worked for him is either too scared to talk or complicit." "Then we find someone who's neither." Wheeler cleaned his glasses. "In my experience, organizations like Mr. Crowley's always have at least one person with a conscience, someone who knows where the bodies are buried and is tired of keeping quiet." The meeting broke up with more questions than answers. Savannah stayed behind with Lydia and Ellis, trying to figure out who inside Victor's operation might be convinced to turn. "The bank manager's too deep in it," Ellis said. "Winters has been manipulating loan records for years." "What about clerks? Assistants?" Lydia suggested. "Most of them are terrified. Victor doesn't hire people with options." Savannah thought about the people she'd seen around Victor: his foreman, who ran his properties with brutal efficiency; his lawyers, who'd perfected the art of legal theft; the bookkeeper, she said suddenly. "What bookkeeper?" Ellis asked. "Victor has a bookkeeper who handles his personal accounts, separate from the bank. Woman named Ruth something. I saw her once at the Mercantile, looking stressed. She was buying whiskey at 10 in the morning. Ruth Carson," Lydia said. "She's been working for Victor for maybe 5 years. Lives alone, keeps to herself. I've tried to talk to her a few times, but she never engages. Someone who keeps to themselves and drinks in the morning sounds like someone with a guilty conscience," Ellis said. "Or just someone who hates her job," Lydia countered. "Either way, she has access to Victor's real financial records, the ones he doesn't show the bank or the auditors." Savannah looked at them. "If we could convince her to share them, that's a big if. She could go straight to Victor. So we make it worth the risk." They found Ruth Carson 2 days later at the small house she rented on the edge of town. Savannah knocked. No answer. Knocked again. The door opened a crack. Ruth peered out. Maybe 50 years old, gray hair pulled back tight, eyes that looked permanently tired. "Miss Carson? I'm Savannah Hale. This is Lydia Bennett and Ellis Hammond. We'd like to talk to you." "I don't talk to people." Ruth started to close the door. "We know you work for Victor Crowley," Savannah said quickly. "We know you keep his books, and we know what that must be like." Ruth's hand froze on the door. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do. You know exactly what Victor does. You've seen the numbers, the falsified loans, the manipulated debts, the property stolen through fraud." Savannah kept her voice gentle. "And I think it's eating you alive." For a long moment, Ruth didn't move. Then her shoulders sagged and she opened the door wider. "Come in, quickly." The house was sparse. Furniture that came with the rental, nothing personal except a shelf of books and a half-empty whiskey bottle on the table. Ruth gestured for them to sit. "I can't help you," she said immediately. "Can or won't?" Ellis asked. "Both. Victor would destroy me. I'd never work again. Might not survive long enough to worry about work. He's going to destroy all of us if someone doesn't stop him, Savannah said. How many families have you watched him ruin? Ruth looked away. I don't count anymore. Why do you keep working for him? Because I'm a woman alone with no family and limited options. Because Victor pays well. Because... She stopped. Because I told myself what he did wasn't my responsibility. I just kept the books. I didn't make the decisions. But you knew. Of course I knew. I know everything. Every falsified entry, every manipulated total, every property taken through manufactured debt. Ruth's voice was raw. I know about your mother's farm in Missouri, Miss Hale. I know about the warehouse fire that killed Margaret Simmons's father. I know about 20 years of systematic theft. The room went silent. Then help us prove it, Savannah said. I'd need protection, guaranteed safety, a way out of Red Hollow. We can arrange that, Ellis said. The territorial prosecutor would offer immunity in exchange for testimony and evidence. Victor has connections with the prosecutors. Not all of them. And with your records, they'd have to act. Ruth stood, walked to the window, stared out at nothing. I have copies of everything. Victor doesn't know. I've been keeping duplicates for 3 years, thinking someday I might need insurance. Where are they? Lydia asked. Safe. Hidden where Victor would never look. Will you give them to us? Ruth turned back. If I do this, I lose everything. My job, my home, probably my life if Victor finds out before the law protects me. If you don't do this, Savannah said, how many more families get destroyed? How many more mothers die? How many more children lose their homes? Ruth closed her eyes. I need 2 days to get my affairs in order, to prepare for leaving. We can protect you starting now. No. If I suddenly change my routine, Victor will notice. She opened her eyes. Come back in 2 days. Midnight. I'll have everything ready. They left feeling cautiously optimistic. 2 days wasn't long. And Ruth seemed genuine. But Savannah couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to go wrong. The next morning, she found out what. She was at Ethan's ranch discussing cooperative business when Frank rode up hard, his horse lathered and breathing heavy. Fire, Frank said. The Martinez place. Barn's burning. They rode fast. By the time they arrived, the barn was fully engulfed, flames shooting 30 feet high. Heat so intense they couldn't get close. The Martinez family stood in their yard watching everything burn. Their children were crying. How did it start? Ethan asked. Don't know, Mr. Martinez said. His voice was numb. We were inside eating supper. Heard the horses screaming. By the time we got out here, it was too late. Everyone safe? Everyone except the horses. Lost all 3. Savannah walked the perimeter, looking for signs. Found them quickly. Coal oil stains on the grass leading away from the barn. Someone had poured accelerant around the structure before lighting it. This was arson, she told Ethan quietly. You sure? Positive. Same pattern as the prairie fire. Same method Victor's used before. The barn burned for hours. When it finally collapsed, nothing remained except ash and twisted metal. The Martinez family had lost their livestock, their equipment, their savings, and stored grain. They couldn't afford to rebuild. We're leaving the cooperative, Mr. Martinez told Savannah that evening. His face was hollow. I'm sorry, but I can't risk my family. I understand. Do you? Do you really? His anger surfaced. You started this cooperative saying we'd be safer together. But we're not safer. We're targets. And my barn burning proves Victor doesn't care how many of us there are. Savannah had no answer. Because he was right. 3 other families left the cooperative that week. 2 more the week after. Victor was winning through fear, showing that organization didn't equal protection. The night before they were supposed to meet Ruth Carson, Savannah sat with Lydia and Ellis planning their approach. What if she changed her mind? Lydia asked. What if she told Victor? Then we're walking into a trap, Ellis said. So we don't go alone. We bring witnesses, protection. That might scare her off. They debated for hours without resolution. Finally decided to keep it small, just the 3 of them, but have Ethan and Frank waiting nearby in case something went wrong. Midnight came cold and moonless. Savannah, Lydia, and Ellis approached Ruth's house on foot, leaving their horses a block away. The house was dark except for a single lamp in the back window. Savannah knocked quietly. No answer. She knocked again. Ruth, it's Savannah Hale. Still nothing. Ellis tried the door. It opened, unlocked, swinging inward on silent hinges. They exchanged glances. Ruth? Savannah called softly. They entered carefully. The front room was empty. No furniture, no books, no whiskey bottle. Everything was gone like Ruth had never lived there. She ran, Lydia said. Or was taken, Ellis countered. They checked the other rooms. All empty. In the back bedroom, Savannah found a piece of paper on the floor. She picked it up. It was a note in Ruth's handwriting. I'm sorry. I couldn't. He knows. Victor got to her, Savannah said, or she lost her nerve. They left quickly, heading back to where Ethan and Frank were waiting. Savannah felt defeat settling over her like wet wool, heavy, suffocating. We were close, she said. So close. We'll find another way, Ethan said. There is no other way. Ruth was our chance. Without her records, Wheeler can't build a case that'll stand. They rode back in silence. When they reached Savannah's cabin, Ethan dismounted with her. You can't give up, he said. I'm not giving up. I'm being realistic. Realistic or defeated? What's the difference when the outcome's the same? Savannah was too tired to hide her despair. Victor wins. He always wins. And I was stupid to think a cooperative and some documentation would change that. You weren't stupid. You were brave. Bravery doesn't matter when you're losing. Ethan caught her arm as she turned to go inside. Look at me. She did. His face was serious in the lamplight. You've already changed things, he said. The cooperative still has 30 families working together. Wheeler's investigation is real, even without Ruth's records, and every person who stood up to Victor knows they're not alone anymore. That matters. Tell that to the Martinez family, to their burned barn. I'm not saying there's no cost. I'm saying the cost of not fighting would have been higher. Savannah wanted to believe him, but exhaustion and disappointment made belief feel impossible. Go home, Ethan. It's late. Savannah, please, just go home. He studied her for another moment, then nodded and mounted his horse. Savannah watched him ride away, then went inside and sat in darkness. She woke to pounding on her door at dawn, stumbled out of bed, grabbed her shotgun, opened up to find Wheeler standing there with Ellis. We found her, Wheeler said without preamble. Found who? Ruth Carson. She's in Topeka. Contacted my office overnight asking for protection. Savannah's exhaustion evaporated. She has the records? Everything. 15 years of falsified accounts, manipulated loans, documented fraud. She brought it all. Wheeler's expression was grim satisfaction. I'm filing formal charges against Victor Crowley this morning. Fraud, conspiracy, theft by deception, and I'm recommending criminal prosecution. Will it stick? With this evidence? Yes, it'll stick. News spread through Red Hollow like wildfire. By noon, everyone knew Victor was being charged. By evening, Sheriff Hayes had reluctantly served the arrest warrant. Victor's lawyer posted bail immediately. No surprise there. But the damage was done. The facade of respectability Victor had maintained for decades was cracked wide open. Savannah was at Lydia's boarding house when Victor walked in. The room went silent. 20 cooperative members were there for a meeting. All of them stared at the man who'd terrorized them for years. Victor looked older somehow, smaller. The expensive suit didn't hide how diminished he seemed. Miss Hale, he said, might I have a word? Anything you say to me, you can say in front of everyone here. Victor glanced around at the hostile faces. I underestimated you, I'll admit that. Is this an apology? This is an acknowledgement. You organized effectively, found leverage I didn't anticipate, created problems I couldn't solve with my usual methods. Your usual methods being fraud and arson? I've never been convicted of either. He smiled without warmth. But I suppose that might change now. It will change. Ruth's testimony is detailed. Your financial records are damning. You're going to face actual consequences. Perhaps, or perhaps my lawyers will find technicalities. Perhaps witnesses will recant. Perhaps evidence will be deemed inadmissible. Victor's eyes were cold. I've been playing this game for 30 years, Miss Hale. You've been playing for 6 months. Don't assume you've won. I don't assume anything. But I know this much. You're not untouchable anymore. And every family you've hurt knows it. Victor looked at the faces around the room, saw hatred, fear, defiance. For the first time in years, saw people who weren't intimidated. "We'll see what a jury decides," he said. He left. The room erupted in conversation the moment the door closed. Excitement, worry, speculation about what came next. Savannah felt nothing except exhaustion and a grim certainty that Victor was right about one thing: this wasn't over. The trial was set for 6 weeks later in Topeka. Ellis explained that Victor's lawyers would try every delay tactic imaginable, but the territorial prosecutor was pushing for swift action given the scope of the charges. Those 6 weeks were brutal. Victor's legal team went on the offensive, questioning Ruth's credibility, challenging the admissibility of financial records, filing motions to dismiss on technical grounds. They painted Victor as a successful businessman being attacked by disgruntled debtors who couldn't manage their own finances. The cooperative held together, but barely. Some members were subpoenaed to testify and were terrified of perjury charges if their memories didn't match documentation perfectly. Others faced economic pressure as Victor's remaining allies made life difficult, denied credit, charged higher prices, spread rumors. Savannah spent those weeks preparing testimony with Ellis, supporting frightened cooperative members, and trying not to collapse under the weight of responsibilities she'd never asked for. Ethan was there constantly, not pushing, not trying to fix everything, just present, showing up at her cabin with food when she forgot to eat, sitting with her on the porch when anxiety made sleep impossible, listening when she needed to talk and staying quiet when she didn't. One evening, 3 weeks before the trial, he asked the question again. "When this is over," he said quietly, "will you marry me?" Savannah looked at him in surprise. "You're proposing again? Now?" "I'm asking if someday is a possibility. Someday I might be in prison if the trial goes wrong. That's not going to happen. You don't know that. I know you didn't do anything wrong, and I know you're the strongest person I've ever met." Ethan's voice was steady. "So yes, I'm asking again, not for an answer now, just for the possibility of someday." Savannah felt something crack in her chest, the armor she'd built around herself developing fissures. "Why do you want to marry someone this difficult?" "Because difficult means you don't break, means you fight for what matters, means I'll never wake up wondering if you stayed because you had no other options." "That's a terrible reason to get married." "It's the only reason worth getting married." They sat in silence. Above them, stars appeared one by one. "Someday is possible," Savannah said finally. "After the trial. After we know what comes next. After you stop fighting long enough to breathe." Something like that. Ethan took her hand. She let him. And for the first time in months, Savannah felt something other than fear. The journey to Topeka took 2 days by wagon. Savannah, Lydia, Ellis, and 12 cooperative members willing to testify. Ethan rode alongside with Frank and 3 ranch hands, partly for protection and partly because he'd refused to let Savannah face this alone. They arrived on a Sunday evening. The territorial courthouse was a 3-story brick building that looked too grand for the justice it supposedly dispensed. Savannah stood outside, staring at it, feeling the weight of what came next. "You ready?" Ellis asked. "No, but I don't think ready matters." The trial started Monday morning. The courtroom was packed. Spectators from 6 counties, newspaper reporters, people who'd traveled days just to watch Victor Crowley finally face consequences. Savannah sat in the front row between Lydia and Ethan, hands clasped tight in her lap. Victor sat at the defense table looking calm and expensive. His lawyers were polished men who radiated confidence. The prosecutor, a thin man named Ashford with tired eyes, looked outmatched before he'd even spoken. The proceedings began with jury selection. Victor's lawyers struck anyone who looked sympathetic to farmers. Ashford struck anyone who looked wealthy. What remained was 12 men who seemed determined to look bored. Opening statements revealed the strategy. Ashford presented Victor as a predatory businessman who'd built his fortune on fraud and intimidation. Victor's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Garrison, painted him as a successful entrepreneur being attacked by bitter debtors who'd mismanaged their own finances. "Ladies and gentlemen," Garrison said, addressing the jury like they were old friends, "what we have here is a simple case of buyer's remorse. These farmers borrowed money they couldn't repay, lost property they couldn't maintain, and now seek to blame Mr. Crowley for their own failures. That's not justice. That's scapegoating." Savannah's hands tightened. Lydia put a hand on her arm. "He's just talking," Lydia whispered. "Wait for our turn." The prosecution's case took 3 days. Ashford called witness after witness, families who'd lost farms, business owners who'd been ruined, Ruth Carson with her meticulous records. Each told stories of loans that mysteriously increased, property damage that happened at convenient times, legal maneuvers that seemed designed to force foreclosure. Ruth's testimony was devastating. She walked through 15 years of falsified loan documents, manipulated interest calculations, and fabricated fees, produced ledgers showing Victor's real accounts versus what he reported to banks and tax authorities, explained in detail how he'd systematically stolen from vulnerable people. Victor's lawyers tried to discredit her, called her a disgruntled employee with a drinking problem, suggested she'd fabricated records out of spite, but Ruth held steady, answering every question with calm precision, and the numbers didn't lie. On the 4th day, Savannah took the stand. Ashford led her through her story: Missouri, her mother's death, the move to Kansas, the debt trap Victor had constructed. She explained about the poisoned wheat, the cut paddock gate, the shawl from her mother's grave. "And why do you believe Mr. Crowley targeted you specifically?" Ashford asked. "Because I refused to be afraid, because I organized people he'd counted on staying isolated, because I was proving that his system could be challenged." "Objection," Garrison said lazily. "Speculation." "Sustained," the judge replied. Ashford rephrased. "Did Mr. Crowley ever make direct threats?" "He told me accidents happen to people who make powerful enemies. He sent me my dead mother's burial shawl. He poisoned my crops while I was gone." "Objection. No evidence Mr. Crowley personally. Your Honor, we have testimony from multiple witnesses about Mr. Crowley's methods." "I'll allow it. Continue." Savannah described the cooperative, the families who'd joined, the systematic retaliation they'd faced. She spoke carefully, keeping emotion out of her voice, focusing on facts. But when Ashford asked about her mother, her voice cracked slightly. "My mother died walking to get help we couldn't afford because Victor Crowley had stolen our Missouri farm. She died in the rain believing she'd failed, and I spent 20 years watching him do the same thing to other families. That's why I fought back." The courtroom was silent. Then Garrison stood for cross-examination. "Miss Hale, you testified that you organized a cooperative of farmers and ranchers. Is that correct?" "Yes." "And this cooperative was designed to resist foreclosures and debt collection?" "It was designed to help families support each other." "By refusing to pay legitimate debts?" "By pooling resources so we could pay debts fairly calculated, not the inflated amounts Victor charged." "You consider yourself a judge of what's fair?" "I consider myself someone who can do basic mathematics. When a $200 loan becomes $400 in 3 months with no explanation, that's not fair, that's theft. Or that's interest and fees you didn't understand because you lack financial education." Savannah met his eyes. "I understand that Victor Crowley has been stealing from vulnerable people for 30 years. I understand that he destroyed my family and dozens of others. And I understand that men like you make careers defending men like him because the money's good and you don't have to look at the damage." "Your Honor." "Miss Hale," the judge said sharply, "answer the questions asked." Garrison smiled. "You clearly have strong feelings about my client. Would you say those feelings have affected your objectivity?" "My mother dying affected my objectivity. Watching families lose everything affected my objectivity. Victor sending me her burial shawl affected my objectivity." Savannah leaned forward. "But the numbers Ruth Carson provided? Those are objective, and they prove everything I've said." Garrison tried for another hour to shake her testimony. Suggested she'd fabricated evidence, manipulated witnesses, organized the cooperative to avoid paying legitimate debts. Savannah held firm, answering each accusation with calm facts. When she finally stepped down, she felt wrung out. Ethan was waiting outside the courtroom. "You did well," he said. "I wanted to hit him. Everyone in that courtroom wanted to hit him, but you kept your composure. That matters." The trial continued for another week. More witnesses, more evidence, more legal maneuvering. Victor's lawyers produced character witnesses who swore he was a pillar of the community, brought in financial experts who claimed the loan practices were standard for the time, suggested that business success shouldn't be punished just because some customers couldn't manage their obligations. But the prosecution had Ruth's records, had witness after witness describing identical patterns, had documentation of fraud so extensive it was hard to dismiss as coincidence. On the 12th day, both sides rested. The judge instructed the jury on the law, fraud, conspiracy, theft by deception, explained reasonable doubt, burden of proof, standards of evidence. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they filed back in, Savannah couldn't read their faces. 12 men who held not just Victor's fate, but the fate of every family he'd hurt. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" the judge asked. "We have, Your Honor." "On the charge of fraud, how do you find?" "Guilty." The words seemed to echo. Someone in the gallery gasped. Savannah felt Lydia grab her hand. "On the charge of conspiracy?" "Guilty." "On the charge of theft by deception?" "Guilty." Victor's face went pale. For the first time since the trial started, he looked genuinely shocked. His lawyers were already standing, filing objections, demanding appeals. The judge banged his gavel. "Mr. Crowley, you will remain in custody pending sentencing. Bailiff, take him into custody." Guards approached Victor. He stood slowly, looking around the courtroom like he couldn't believe this was happening. His eyes found Savannah. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Then he was led away. The courtroom erupted, people crying, talking, some cheering. Reporters rushed out to file stories. Ashford was shaking hands with witnesses. Ellis looked stunned. Savannah sat very still, feeling nothing except exhaustion. "We won," Lydia said. "Savannah, we won." "I know." "Then why do you look like that?" "Because winning doesn't bring back my mother, doesn't undo 20 years of damage, doesn't help all the families who already lost everything." "No, but it stops him from hurting anyone else." That was something. Maybe it was enough. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge gave Victor 15 years in territorial prison. Additionally, all assets gained through fraud were to be seized and redistributed to victims. A special master would be appointed to review land transfers and determine what should be returned. Victor's lawyers promised appeals. But the conviction stood. Red Hollow changed quickly after that. Victor's bank closed within a month, taken over by territorial authorities. The land office was cleaned out, corrupt officials removed. Properties started being returned to families who'd lost them. Savannah got her 80 acres confirmed free and clear. Got documentation showing the Missouri farm had been stolen through fraud, though that land was long gone, sold to someone who'd bought it legitimately and couldn't be forced to return it. But the Kansas land was hers. Completely, finally hers. The cooperative thrived. Without Victor's interference, families could actually work together. They shared wells during the drought that hit that fall, pooled resources to buy equipment, negotiated fair prices with merchants who could no longer price gouge isolated farmers. By winter, the cooperative had 53 member families. By spring, 78. Other counties started forming their own cooperatives, using Red Hollow as a model. Letters arrived from across Kansas territory asking how they'd organized, what legal structures they'd used, how they'd built trust among competing interests. Savannah found herself answering correspondence, traveling to neighboring towns, helping other communities organize. It wasn't work she'd planned for or particularly wanted, but it was work that mattered. And somewhere in the middle of all that work, she realized she was happy. Not perfectly happy. There were still hard days, still moments when she thought about her mother or felt the weight of responsibility, but happy in a way she'd never experienced before, happy in a way that felt earned rather than given. Ethan proposed again in early autumn. They were standing in her wheat field, the western section she'd replanted after clearing the poisoned stalks. The grain was coming in golden and heavy, ready for harvest. Sunset painted everything amber. "I know you said to wait until after the trial," Ethan said. "Trial's over. Victor's in prison. The cooperative's stable, so I'm asking again." Savannah looked at him. This man who'd offered help when she'd been too proud to accept it, who'd stood beside her through stampedes and fires and courtroom battles, who'd never tried to control her or diminish her or make her smaller to fit his expectations. "If I marry you," she said, "people will say you saved me. They'll say I couldn't make it alone, so I found a man to rescue me. People will say whatever makes them feel superior. Doesn't make it true. It'll bother me anyway." "I know, so we'll tell them the truth as many times as we need to." Ethan took her hand. You saved yourself, Savannah. Built a life. Organized a movement. Brought down a criminal. I just had the privilege of watching it happen. That's not entirely accurate. Close enough for anyone who matters. Savannah was quiet. Around them, wheat rustled in wind that smelled like rain coming. Above, the sky was turning purple at the edges. Yes, she said finally. Yes? Yes, I'll marry you, but not in a church with everyone watching, and not in white. What color? Blue, like my mother's shawl. Ethan smiled. Blue sounds perfect. They married 6 weeks later under the cottonwoods at the edge of Savannah's property. Small ceremony, just cooperative members, close friends, people who'd fought alongside them. No fancy dress, no elaborate reception. Just two people making a promise in front of witnesses who understood what promises cost. Lydia stood with Savannah. Frank stood with Ethan. Ellis officiated, reading vows they'd written themselves. Vows about partnership and respect and standing together against whatever came next. When Ethan kissed her, the gathered crowd cheered. Someone started playing fiddle. Food appeared, dishes brought by dozens of families, more than anyone could eat. The celebration lasted until after dark, people talking and laughing and telling stories about the year that had changed everything. Late that night, after everyone had left, Savannah and Ethan sat on her porch, their porch now, watching stars appear. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked. "I'm thinking about my mother, wondering what she'd make of all this. I think she'd be proud. Maybe. Or maybe she'd tell me I took too many risks, got too many people involved in my fight. Is that what you think?" Savannah considered. "No, I think she'd understand why I couldn't fight alone, why I needed to build something bigger than one person's revenge." They sat in comfortable silence. The prairie stretched dark and vast around them, full of sounds Savannah had learned to interpret over years of listening. "Can I show you something?" she asked. She led him inside, lit the lamp, took him to the mantel above the fireplace. There sat the photograph Margaret Simmons had found. Savannah's mother wrapped in the blue shawl, young and smiling, standing beside Savannah's father in front of their Missouri farm. "I thought that was lost," Ethan said quietly. "So did I." Margaret tracked it down through county records, found it in an archive, gave it to me the day after the verdict. Savannah touched the frame gently. "For years I only remembered my mother dying, forgot what she looked like when she was happy. She looks like you. I hope so. I hope I have some of her strength, even though I watch that strength get broken. Strength doesn't mean never breaking. It means putting yourself back together afterward." Savannah looked at him. "When did you get so wise?" "When I started paying attention to you." They stood together in lamplight, studying the photograph of a woman who'd died believing she'd failed, not knowing her daughter would spend years making sure that failure meant something. The next morning, Savannah woke early out of habit, started to get up for chores before remembering it was her wedding day. Well, the day after her wedding day. And maybe she could rest, but rest felt foreign. So she got up anyway, went outside to check her wheat field, found Ethan already there doing the same thing. "You couldn't sleep either?" she asked. "Didn't want to sleep. Wanted to see what married life looked like at dawn. It looks like chores. Wouldn't have it any other way." They worked through morning together, falling into easy partnership. Ethan handled heavy lifting without being asked. Savannah directed repair work without second-guessing herself. They moved around each other like they'd been doing this for years instead of one night. Over breakfast, biscuits Lydia had brought yesterday and coffee strong enough to wake the dead, Ethan asked about her plans. Plans for what? For life, the farm, the cooperative, everything. Savannah thought about this. "I want to expand the wheat operation, bring more land into cultivation, help other women learn what my father taught me about animals and agriculture." She paused. "And I want to make sure what happened with Victor doesn't happen again. Not here, not anywhere." That's ambitious. Everything I've done has been ambitious. Why stop now? No reason. I'm just making sure you know I support it. Even if it means I'm gone sometimes, traveling to help other communities organize. Even then, I didn't marry you to keep you in one place. Ethan refilled her coffee. I married you because you're the kind of person who changes things. Would be stupid to ask you to stop. Savannah felt something warm settle in her chest. You're very different from other men I've known. Good different or bad different? Just different in ways that take getting used to. The cooperative meeting that month drew nearly 80 families. They gathered in the church, the only building large enough, and spent 3 hours discussing shared wells, equipment loans, crop rotation strategies, and fair pricing for the coming harvest. Savannah sat at the front with Lydia and Ellis, taking notes, answering questions, mediating disputes. At one point, George Patterson raised his hand. "I just want to say something," George started. "A year ago, I was about to lose my ranch. Thought I was alone, thought I'd failed my family. Then Savannah organized this cooperative, and suddenly I wasn't alone anymore. We weren't alone anymore." He looked around. Victor tried to isolate us, tried to make us think our struggles were individual failures, but they weren't. They were systematic attacks, and the only way we survived was by refusing to fight separately. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "So I'm proposing we formalize this," George continued. "Make the cooperative a legal entity, elect leadership, create bylaws that protect members and ensure nobody can abuse the system the way Victor did." The motion passed unanimously. They spent the next month drafting bylaws, establishing voting procedures, creating oversight committees. Savannah was elected president despite trying to refuse. Lydia became secretary. Ellis agreed to serve as legal counsel. It was more responsibility than Savannah wanted, but it was also proof that what they'd built would survive beyond individual people. That winter was hard. Drought followed by early snow, cattle losses, crop failures that hit even careful farmers. But the cooperative weathered it together. Families with extra grain shared with those who'd lost their harvest. Ranchers with healthy stock helped those who'd lost cattle. Wells that still flowed provided water to neighbors whose wells had dried. By spring, every member family had survived. Not thrived, survival was hard enough, but survived. And that mattered. On the anniversary of the trial verdict, the cooperative held a celebration. Everyone gathered at the church with food and music and stories about the year that had changed everything. Savannah stood to speak, feeling self-conscious about all the eyes on her. "I'm not good at speeches," she started. "Most of you know I'd rather work than talk, but today feels important enough that I should try." She took a breath. "A year ago, I was terrified, thought we might lose everything, thought Victor might win despite all our evidence and testimony, thought standing up to him might have been the biggest mistake of my life." People listened quietly. "But we won, and in winning, we proved something I'd forgotten over years of fighting alone. We proved that connection is stronger than isolation, that communities working together can defeat individuals working for themselves, that vulnerable people organizing become powerful people." She paused, choosing words carefully. "My mother died believing she was alone, believing her struggles were personal failures, and for years I thought the same thing about my own struggles. But they weren't personal, they were systematic. Victor built a fortune by making people feel isolated and powerless, and we destroyed that fortune by refusing to be isolated anymore." Someone started clapping. Others joined until the whole room was applauding. "So here's what I want to say," Savannah continued when the noise died down. "What we built here isn't just about defeating one man, it's about changing how we think about strength and vulnerability and community. It's about remembering that the people who seem weak when they're alone can be unstoppable when they work together." She sat down to more applause, feeling embarrassed but also proud. Ethan squeezed her hand. Later, after the celebration wound down and most people had left, Savannah stood outside the church watching the sun set over land she'd fought for. Lydia joined her. "You did good." "I talked too much." "You said what needed saying. There's a difference." They stood in comfortable silence. "Do you think it'll last?" Savannah asked. "The cooperative, everything we built." "I think it'll last as long as people remember why we built it, as long as they remember what it was like before." Lydia looked at her. "You gave people something to fight for besides just survival. That doesn't disappear easily." "Victor might get out eventually, on appeal or early release. Let him. By then we'll be too established to take down, and he'll be too old to start over." Savannah hoped that was true. Over the next year, life settled into rhythms that felt almost normal. The cooperative grew. 90 families by summer, 112 by fall. Other counties formed their own cooperatives using Red Hollow's model. Territorial legislation was proposed to regulate loan practices and prevent the kind of fraud Victor had committed. Savannah and Ethan worked their combined land, his ranch and her farm forming a single operation. They built a new house between the two properties, bigger than her cabin, smaller than his ranch house, perfectly sized for a life they were still figuring out together. On evenings when work was done, they sat on the porch and talked about everything and nothing. Plans for spring planting, stories about the cattle drive where they'd met, dreams about what the valley might look like in 10 years, 20 years after they were gone. "Do you think we'll have children?" Ethan asked one night. Savannah had been avoiding this question. "I don't know. I never thought about it before. Was too busy surviving. And now? Now I'm still figuring out how to be married. Adding children seems complicated." "Everything you do is complicated." "Exactly. So let's give it time." But time had a way of making decisions for people. 6 months later, Savannah realized she was pregnant. She told Ethan on a Tuesday evening, standing in their kitchen, feeling terrified and uncertain. "You're sure?" he asked. "As sure as I can be without a doctor confirming it." Ethan sat down hard. "I don't know how to be a father. I don't know how to be a mother. My own mother died when I was 11. They sat in silence, processing. "We'll figure it out," Ethan said finally. "Same way we figured out everything else." "What if I'm bad at it?" "Then you'll be bad at it the same way you're bad at accepting help, which is to say, not actually bad, just convinced you are." Savannah almost smiled. "I'm scared." "Me too." "But you're happy?" Terrified and happy, both at once. Savannah put her hand on her stomach, feeling nothing yet, but knowing something was growing there, a whole new person who would depend on her, trust her, need her to be better than she felt capable of being. "I want to be different from my mother," she said quietly. "I want our child to grow up knowing they're safe, knowing they have community, knowing they don't have to fight alone. They will, because of what you built." The baby, a girl, was born in early spring during a thunderstorm that shook the house. Lydia attended the birth, along with Mrs. Chen, who'd delivered half the babies in the county. Ethan waited downstairs, pacing, until Lydia called him up to meet his daughter. They named her Margaret, after Savannah's mother. Holding the baby for the first time, Savannah felt something shift in her understanding of the world. This tiny person represented everything she'd fought for: the right to build a life on her own terms, the power of community over isolation, the possibility of futures that weren't determined by past failures. "She's beautiful," Ethan said. "She's wrinkled in red." "Beautiful and wrinkled in red?" Savannah looked down at her daughter's face, scrunched and furious, already protesting the world she'd been born into. "I hope she's a fighter. With you as her mother, she won't have a choice." Margaret grew fast, rolling over by 4 months, sitting up by 6, babbling constantly, like she had opinions about everything. Savannah brought her to cooperative meetings, propped in a basket while business was conducted. The baby became a fixture, passed from person to person, loved by everyone. On Margaret's first birthday, they held a celebration that doubled as a cooperative anniversary. 3 years since formation now. 147 member families, successful harvests, shared prosperity, proof that the model worked. Savannah stood holding her daughter, watching families gather to celebrate something they'd all built together, and felt a completeness she'd never imagined possible. "You look content," Lydia observed. "I'm not sure I know what content feels like." "That's what you look like. Content. Maybe even happy." Savannah considered this. "I think about my mother sometimes, about what she'd make of all this. The cooperative, the farm, Margaret. She'd be proud. Or she'd tell me I got lucky, that I had help she never had. Then you'd tell her that you created that help, that you built the community she never had access to." That was true. Savannah had built something her mother never could, not because her mother was weak, but because her mother had been alone. And being alone made even the strongest people vulnerable. "I want Margaret to grow up knowing she doesn't have to do everything herself," Savannah said. "I want her to understand that asking for help isn't weakness. The communities survive when individuals work together." "Then teach her that. Show her what you built here." Savannah looked around at the celebration, families eating together, children playing, people who'd survived hardship because they'd refused to face it separately. This was her legacy. Not just the land or the cooperative, but the idea that vulnerability didn't have to mean defeat. As the sun set and lanterns were lit and music started playing, Savannah stood with her daughter and her husband and her community and felt something she'd spent years not letting herself feel. Hope, not the desperate hope of someone barely surviving, but the deep, solid hope of someone who'd built something lasting, something that would outlive her, something that proved strength came not from fighting alone, but from refusing to let anyone fight alone. Years later, when Margaret was old enough to understand, Savannah told her the story of Victor Crowley, about the man who'd built an empire on isolation and fear, about the families he'd destroyed, about the cooperative that had fought back. "Why are you telling me this?" Margaret asked. She was 7, serious, already showing signs of the stubbornness Savannah recognized from her own childhood. "Because I want you to understand where we came from. I want you to know that the safety you feel, the community you have, the land we own, none of it was guaranteed. It was fought for. By you? By me and hundreds of other people who refused to accept that being vulnerable meant being powerless." Margaret considered this. Was Victor a bad man? Victor was a man who saw other people's pain and decided to profit from it. Whether that makes him bad or just broken, I don't know. But I know the damage he caused was real. Are there more people like him? Probably. There are always people who try to build power by making others weak. Then what do we do? Savannah pulled her daughter close. We do what we've always done. We work together. We refuse to fight alone. We build communities strong enough that predators can't pick us off one by one. Is that why you started the cooperative? That's exactly why. Margaret nodded, processing. Then, when I grow up, I want to do that too. Help people organize, build communities. Savannah felt her throat tighten. Then I'll teach you everything I know. The cooperative continued growing. By the time Margaret was 10, it had spread to 12 counties with over 400 member families. The model had been adopted across Kansas territory and beyond. People wrote from as far as California asking for guidance on forming their own cooperatives. Savannah traveled sometimes, helping communities organize, sharing what she'd learned. But mostly she stayed in Red Hollow, working the land, raising her daughter, maintaining the structures that had saved so many families. Ethan's hair went gray. Savannah's hands developed arthritis that made farm work harder. But they kept working, kept building, kept proving that the cooperative model could sustain itself across generations. On the 20th anniversary of Victor's conviction, a journalist from Topeka came to interview Savannah. He wanted to write a story about the cooperative movement, about the woman who'd started it all. "I didn't start anything," Savannah told him. "I just refused to lose alone." "But you organized the first cooperative in the territory." "I organized desperate people who were tired of being picked off individually. The cooperative was their idea as much as mine." The journalist scribbled notes. What would you say to people facing similar situations today? Communities being exploited by powerful individuals or corporations? Savannah thought carefully. I'd say that isolation is always the weapon. Predators, whether they're people like Victor or systems like unfair lending practices, depend on keeping victims separate. They depend on people thinking their struggles are individual failures rather than systematic attacks. And the solution? The solution is refusing to be isolated, finding others in the same situation, building networks strong enough that individual vulnerabilities become collective strength. She paused. It's not easy. It requires trust, coordination, people putting aside individual interests for group survival. But it's the only thing that works against organized exploitation. Do you think the cooperative model can address all forms of economic injustice? No, it's not a perfect solution. We still face challenges, internal disputes, resource allocation problems, members who take more than they contribute. But it's better than the alternative, which is everyone struggling alone. The article ran in newspapers across 3 territories. Letters poured in from people inspired by the story, people facing their own struggles with exploitation and isolation. Savannah answered what letters she could, always emphasizing the same points. Organize, document, refuse to fight alone. Build something that outlasts individual people. She was 52 when Victor Crowley died in prison. 13 years into his sentence, never released despite multiple appeals. The news reached Red Hollow via telegram. Savannah read it twice, feeling nothing except a distant sadness for wasted potential. How do you feel? Ethan asked. I don't know. Relieved, maybe, but also aware that Victor was just one man. The systems that enabled him still exist. So we keep fighting those systems until we can't fight anymore. Then Margaret's generation keeps fighting. Margaret was 17 now, already working with neighboring cooperatives, already showing the organizational skills and stubborn determination that had defined her mother's life. She took the news of Victor's death with the same calm pragmatism she applied to everything. "Does this change anything?" she asked. "Not really," Savannah said. "The work continues regardless." And it did. The cooperative thrived. New challenges emerged, droughts, economic downturns, conflicts between member families, but the structure held. The principle held. People working together could survive what individuals couldn't. Savannah lived to see Margaret marry, have children, take over leadership of the cooperative. Lived to see the valley transform from a collection of struggling farms into a thriving network of sustainable agriculture. Lived to see the ideas she'd fought for become established practice. She died at 71, in her sleep, in the house she'd built with Ethan. Her funeral drew over 500 people, cooperative members, people she'd helped organize in other counties, families who owed their survival to the system she'd created. Margaret gave the eulogy, standing strong despite grief. "My mother spent her life proving that vulnerable people organizing become powerful people," Margaret said. She understood that the world tries to make us think our struggles are individual problems, that if we're suffering, it's because we failed personally. But she also understood that this is a lie designed to keep us isolated and weak. She looked out at the gathered crowd, farmers and ranchers and business owners, young and old, people from 6 territories who'd come to pay respects. What my mother built wasn't just a cooperative, it was a refusal to accept that isolation is inevitable, a refusal to let predatory systems go unchallenged, a refusal to believe that the way things are is the way things must be. Margaret's voice strengthened. And that refusal continues. In every cooperative meeting, every shared resource, every family that survives because others helped them. My mother's legacy isn't a monument or a building. It's the simple understanding that we're stronger together than we could ever be apart. They buried Savannah next to Ethan under the cottonwoods where they'd married. The cooperative planted a garden there, practical, like she would have wanted. Vegetables and herbs that member families could harvest, continuing the principle of shared resources even in memorial. Years later, Margaret's daughter, named Savannah after her grandmother, stood in that garden reading the simple stone marker, Savannah Hale Mercer. She refused to fight alone. "Tell me about her," young Savannah asked. Margaret smiled. "Your grandmother believed that strength comes not from being invulnerable, but from refusing to face vulnerability alone. She believed that communities survive when individuals work together, and she spent her life proving it." "Did it work?" Margaret looked at the thriving valley around them, cooperative farms as far as she could see, families prospering through shared effort, a model that had spread across the entire territory. "It's still working," she said. "That's her real legacy. Not that she won a single fight, but that she built something that keeps winning long after she's gone." Young Savannah touched the marker gently. "I want to do that too." "Then I'll teach you everything she taught me." And the work continued, generation after generation. The cooperative grew, evolved, adapted to new challenges while maintaining its core principle. Isolation is the weapon. Community is the defense. In the end, Savannah Hale's greatest victory wasn't defeating Victor Crowley. It was proving that the thing he'd counted on most, people's willingness to fight alone, could be transformed into the thing that defeated him. That vulnerable people refusing to be isolated could create power no individual could match. The flour they'd spilled into the dirt that scorching summer day hadn't destroyed her. Like everything else she'd endured, she'd transformed it, turned loss into community, pain into purpose, isolation into connection. And in doing so, she'd fed not just herself, but everyone around her. That was the lesson. That was the legacy. And that was the story worth remembering.